the laziest Kryptonian in the Marvel Universe. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction, so don't try any techniques you hear here in real life. Your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 301 Photography Equipment. But setting traps and fishing are all about patience. Those who lose their cool lose half the battle. Henry, armed with the many trump cards, was undoubtedly more confident than the others. At worst, he could just fly to the moon and live in seclusion. The femme fatale's tactics were simply another version of finding a thug to harass a beautiful woman, then stepping in as a heroine to take advantage of the situation. Henry was all too familiar with them. Did he feel like he'd just experienced a similar tactic? Tony Stark's warning from the beginning of the year was still fresh in his mind, and he was on so many lists that he thought he should take some precautions. While pondering this, Henry asked another question. If I close the clinic, will that be okay? Considering his role as Charlize Theron's manager, Henry couldn't afford to constantly wait for the ringing bell at the Black Clinic, as he had for the past year or so. If the two sides came into conflict, would he need to hone his time management skills? The best approach, of course, was to push off the less important side. Henry's question didn't surprise Charlie at all. You didn't just have this idea today, did you? Henry said unhappily. Come on. I don't believe you don't know that the FBI and the police have been keeping watch outside my clinic for the past 6 months. Luckily, the place you picked for me is well connected, so they can't completely block it off, giving me a chance to escape. Even if I change places, will the situation improve? Charlie smiled, neither admitting nor denying. If you can solve your own problems, that would be best. The hotel's rule is that medical requests for gold coins cannot be refused, but if you can't find the person, this rule is certainly not violated, right? Henry understood the implication of this sentence. He just didn't say it out loud that he was quitting. However, considering the precedent of helping the city councilor's child with surgery, the Continental Hotel may still find him to do the job by designation. There are always some VVVIP customers who encounter difficult and complicated diseases that cannot be treated by ordinary medical means, and they need a guy like the repairman who has no bottom line to take action. This way of cooperation is not unacceptable, at least it will not take up too much of his time to bandage and treat a group of scum. Do you know how many people the repairman has saved are people he can't stand? They all want to inject the other party with an excessive amount of adrenaline and get a top-level medical service, the kind that takes them to heaven. After drinking a double espresso in one gulp, Henry stood up and prepared to leave. He said casually, "Thanks, Charlie. If you want to contact me, you know my phone number." The old gunman didn't say anything, just raised his coffee cup, as if in a toast, and sent off a young man who could return to the bright world. For many people, the Continental Hotel is just a shelter from the land of decadence, and it is not a good place either. Henry, who left the Continental Hotel, set his sights back on the original project. That is, the camera that he was going to use to help Charlize Theron train her acting skills. Of course, he couldn't get a large camera for movies. 35cm film is expensive, developing is expensive, and projection equipment is also expensive. It is totally beyond the reach of ordinary families. For Henry, there is no need. 8cm cameras are considered for home use, but they are relatively early equipment. And there are also a series of problems. It is not user-friendly for ordinary people, unless they are enthusiast-level players. The most suitable type of equipment is the Handicam camera launched by Sony in 1985, commonly known as the V8 camera. The 8 here refers to the small 8mm wide tape, not film. It records analog signals. In 1988, Sony released the new High 8 camera, boasting a higher resolution than the previous V8. This so-called resolution can be considered the definition of the digital age. But why are those working with these cameras, including those producing television series, often ranked below filmmakers on the contempt scale? The reason is that these devices lack detail compared to 35mm film. Anyone who has seen these early home cameras knows that even close-ups of faces can barely capture subtle changes in the corners of the eyes or mouth. All that's visible is a blurry mess. By digital standards, The resolution of home cameras and televisions of this era was only 480p, or even lower, 360p. Therefore, television producers often had to resort to exaggerated acting to achieve the desired effect. This separates them from filmmakers, placing them at the lower ends of the contempt scale. This level of equipment was certainly not what Henry wanted. The next generation digital standard has been established by the HD Digital VCR Agreement Committee, comprised of Panasonic, Sony, JVC, Philips, Sanyo, Hitachi, Sharp, Thomson, Mitsubishi, and Toshiba. In April 2005, the specifications for home digital VCRs, known as DV, were finalized. Next year, Sony will release a new generation of home DV camcorders. While they still use tapes, they utilize digital signals rather than analog. While DV's image quality is superior to the V8 camcorder, essentially comparable to the Hi8, Henry couldn't sneak into Sony and use a prototype. Furthermore, even DV's image quality wouldn't meet Henry's expectations. Using the digital era's resolution standards, DV camcorders only achieve 480i. Compared to digital resolution, the quality of 35mm film requires at least 4K, UHD, to be comparable. This is why many filmmakers in the 2010s turned to television production. Besides the significant shifts in the film and television ecosystem, home televisions and camera equipment are now comparable to cinema quality. Film's only advantage is the 200-inch screen. This has led many film actors to condescend and enter the television market. Henry's desire to create digital equipment comparable to cinema production in one fell swoop was somewhat unreasonable. However, based on the established digital standards, it seemed possible to create a 720p or 1080p upgrade. After all, it was just a product for his own entertainment. The real consideration wasn't the high-resolution codec required, but the capacity of the storage media. 20 minutes of uncompressed UHD footage required 4 terabytes of hard drive space. And hard drives in those days were just reaching the edge of GB, still measured in single digits. Henry, who wanted to skip tapes and go straight to hard drives, couldn't develop a high-resolution codec standard indefinitely. Otherwise, he'd need an entire disk array just to store the data, which would be ridiculous. Relying on his manual dexterity and the support of his superbrain, Henry quickly came up with a plan. It wasn't significantly ahead of its time, but it was sufficient for his purposes. The most important thing is that there are many existing items that can be directly used and modified. This saves a lot of time and effort, and the equipment Charlie's needs can be obtained in a few days, rather than waiting for a year or two. The reason for using a digital camera instead of using existing equipment is, of course, that the footage captured by a digital camera can be directly imported into a computer for post-production, and all that is needed is the supporting software. The processing speed depends on the performance of the computer. Older analog equipment, on the other hand, requires specialized post-production equipment. Not to mention the film developing step. Digital is the future, and Henry can do it, so there is no need to go against the grain. Chapter 302 Homemade Camera Test. They say there are 3 types of singers, those who sing beautifully, those who sing poorly, and those who sing with utter dedication but are oblivious to the audience's pain. The same is true with acting. Every actor believes they've delivered an Oscar-worthy performance, yet they're unaware of the audience's embarrassment. The equipment Henry had prepared was indeed stunning and novel. But Charlize Theron quickly shook off her feelings and turned to watch her own awkward performance in front of the camera. Meanwhile, Henry was adjusting the newly minted equipment, trying to get the various parameters and settings right so it could be used directly. The front half of the camera he was using was an old Hollywood movie camera, a common sight on small, budget-conscious productions. This being Hollywood, discarded camera equipment was plentiful. Through connections with the Screen Actors Guild, Henry quickly located a derelict camera, its optical components largely intact, but the rest of the equipment in disarray. It was rumored to have been a casualty of a stunt sequence in a major action film. It hadn't been disposed of yet, a boon for Henry, a scavenger. The back half, modified by Henry, resembled a crudely crafted metal monstrosity. Exposed wires, brackets screwed or welded, and all sorts of bizarre devices secured behind the lens. Henry paid no attention to aesthetics. This was a hastily rigged creation, and also because it could potentially be modified and upgraded, and packaging it all up would be cumbersome. This custom-made component consisted of the photosensitive element and encoder. These converted the image captured by the lens into a digital signal, which was then stored on Henry's custom-made high-capacity hard drive. He considered purchasing commercially available high-capacity hard drives and building a NAS server as storage for the camera. However, the time required for a custom project was no less than simply building a high-capacity hard drive, so Henry opted to go all in. After all, since this was just his own creation, no one would care if it was too far ahead of its time. Of course, the output wasn't a modern-day CRT screen or one of those fresh from the lab LCDs. Henry simply installed a projector, using a whitewashed wall as the screen. Henry had long since given up on television. While the average person outside was still marveling at 32 or 38-inch screens, he had already installed a cinema-quality projection screen at home. His home lacked the space of a movie theater, so he couldn't afford a 200-inch screen. However, the spare wall provided a projection area of 80 to 90 inches, more than enough. He normally watched TV by connecting the antenna and TV decoder to the projector. He then slightly reduced the projection range to avoid a grainy image. This kind of mechanical work with motors was already a breeze for Henry. Now, connecting this projector to his homemade camera and projecting the footage wasn't a big deal. If there was a downside, it was that the room lights had to be dimmed to use the projector. Otherwise, the projected image would be washed out and difficult to discern. Unlike commercial projectors, Henry's projector didn't require the room lights to be completely turned down to see the image clearly. However, Charlize still dimmed the lights to see the image more clearly. Besides providing a clearer picture, it also allows for a clearer view of what's going on inside the room, preventing you from bumping into anything while moving around. After all, this isn't a movie theater where you can't sit still for 2 hours. Charlize Theron was initially impressed by Henry's equipment, especially the use of an entire wall as a screen for the projector. She'd never seen a screen that large before, except in a movie theater. Soon, she was left speechless by her own impromptu performance in front of the camera. It was a monologue from the classic play, Shakespeare's Macbeth, by the wicked Lady Macbeth. For a villain like this, simply making them irritating is half the battle. The other half requires understanding the character's psychology, ensuring that body language and subtle expressions align with their current behavior. After all, the root causes of a person's hate can vary greatly, and each requires a different performance. Capturing these nuances, bringing the character to life, is the true success. But during the test take, Henry simply said to do a casual scene, take it easy, and test the equipment. So Charlize pulled out one of her acting school lessons, not too casually, but not too seriously either. Then she regretted it. Henry wasn't using a home-sized V8 camera, but something approaching cinematic quality. With every detail magnified and projected onto an 80 or 90-inch wall, Charlize was so embarrassed she could have carved a 3-bedroom apartment with her toes. Especially when she burst into laughter mid-sentence, then straightened her expression and continued acting as if nothing had happened. This was a complete black mark. Even being tricked into a Playboy photoshoot hadn't made her feel this despairing. But watching her first on-camera scene, Charlize Theron, her eyes reddened, felt the urge to silence anyone who knew about it. Burn the film, Charlize glared at the man standing by the camera, watching the footage with laughter. Oh, is that the jargon you learned in acting school? Not bad, you've learned something. Movie cameras all use 35mm film. Burn the negative is, of course, the most drastic way to ruin a film or a performance, rendering it impossible to restore. It's industry jargon. But realistically, Henry didn't use film, so of course, he had no negatives to burn. So, facing Charlize, her eyes reddened, her claw-like hands nearly reaching for her neck as she muttered, "Burn the negative," Henry had no choice but to appease her, saying, okay, this camera doesn't have negatives, so we can't burn them. But I'll delete the archive of this footage later so there's no data left." Really, from her original horror movie vibe, she transformed into a deer-like figure, her tearful eyes gazing out at him, a heartwarming gesture. Given this transformation, Henry had to admit that this girl had every chance of becoming an Oscar-winning actress. Henry immediately took to the camera. Since she was the only one using it, she didn't have a simple interface. All commands had to be entered via keyboard. With a few clicks, the previous file was deleted, and the projector screen naturally went blank. This finally made Charlize breathe a sigh of relief. While it was a pity that she couldn't preserve the future actress's youthful performance, it also proved that the device she had spent several days crafting was indeed useful. Now, The next performance training could proceed smoothly. Chapter 303 Performance Training. If you want to learn acting, you can't just pick classics or Oscar-winning films as your study material. Henry's target is films that have won or been nominated for Oscars for acting, including leading actor, actress, and supporting actor. Before the Oscars were tarnished by various PR and smear campaigns, they still held a certain value. Otherwise, filmmakers around the world wouldn't be so eager to see the Oscars as a testament to their achievements. Therefore, films nominated for acting awards, or even winning them, must have some shining points worth learning from. Charlize had already learned about various schools and methods in her acting school. Henry didn't want to dwell on these theoretical topics, so he started directly with imitation. The first film he used as a model was Misery, based on Stephen King's novel of the same name. This psychological horror film, released in 1990, won lead actress Cassie Bates the 63rd Academy Award for Best Actress and the Golden Globe for Best Actress that same year. This isn't a film about a heroine or sweet girls, but rather a horrifying story about a crazed book fan, not content with simply sending razor blades to the author, who, upon encountering the author in distress, imprisons him and forces him to write a story to his will. Honestly, those who only talk are weak. Look at what they've done. The heroine is first and foremost a fan of the book, but then, because the character's fates don't match her expectations, she develops hatred for the author. When she sees the author in person, she tries to play nice, displaying a kind sight and trying to control him. But when the author refuses to cooperate, she reveals her madness, using it to intimidate him. She even kills a police officer, proving that her threats aren't just warnings, they're actions. The emotional intensity of this multifaceted character, coupled with the impressive performance of the voluptuous actress, Cassie Bates, made her a star that year, beating out rising stars and veterans like Julia Roberts, Meryl Streep, Angelica Huston, and Jenny Woodward. She's also the first actress in film history to win an Oscar for a horror film. Watching her portray a character with erratic, shifting emotions, her emotions are constantly revealed in close-up. From gloomy to furious, these extremes are vividly portrayed. This first-time actress, despite her supporting cast, becomes the film's singular voice. Consider that James Caan, the actor opposite Kathy Bates, is a veteran actor who previously played Sonny Corleone in The Godfather, earning both an Oscar and Golden Globe nominations for Best Supporting Actor that year, with a 27-year film career. Even he could only tremble under Kathy Bates's hammer. This was the first film she chose to imitate. Honestly, it was a hellish start for Charlize Theron. Henry first watched the film with Charlize. Then, during their second viewing, Henry would explain the actress' acting techniques through each highlight sequence. Sometimes, the director's ingenuity and cinematography are combined to create a classic visual language. Then, a scene from the film was chosen, and Charlize was asked to memorize the lines. After figuring out the emotions, she performed it in front of Henry's camera. With limited props and an imaginary set, she simply did the same things and spoke the same lines as the film's heroine. Then, the scene was screened live. A certain future actress wished she could find a hole to crawl into, questioning whether she still wanted to pursue a career as an actress. Charlize collapsed in Henry's arms. This was her third performance of the same scene, and she felt insecure about the reality still so different from the original. She used Henry's arms as a safe haven, and fell into self-pity. Henry smiled softly and soothed, "You don't think Miss Kathy Bates is some sweet girl who gets paid for giggling and flirting in front of the camera? Look at her. She graduated from Southern Methodist University. That school has an art school, and its music school is one of the best in the country. She moved to New York City in 1969 and began performing off-Broadway. She made a big screen debut in 1970, but due to her appearance, she primarily worked in the theater. She was even nominated for a Tony Award for Best Actress in a Drama in 1988. Although she had limited screen experience, she had appeared in fewer than 10 films before the game in minor roles. She had, over 20 years, accumulated extensive acting experience and a solid foundation in drama. So, in her first starring role, she instantly became a star. If you were an elementary school student just starting out playing basketball, she might not be a Michael Jordan-level Black Jesus, but at least a Hall of Fame-level star. That's the difference between you two. Upon hearing this, Charlize was displeased. She pouted, stood up, and rolled her eyes. "So, by comparing her to me, are you suggesting I give up acting?" "Of course not. He placed a video cassette box he rented from Blockbuster in Charlize Theron's hands, pointing specifically to the large words Oscar winner on the box. Henry said, "I'm telling you, aim to be an actress as good as her. If all you do is flirt and play the role of an infomaniac to get the spotlight, what will you do when Hollywood's novelty wears off? Will you pay a price to continue your acting career? When that red sofa appears before you, what will you do? Compromise? Climb on it and stretch your legs? No, acting is everything for an actor. You have to have the acting skills to handle any role. Only then will you be considered by directors and filmmakers when they need you. A wide range of acting also means more opportunities than others. You can also play different roles at different ages. You won't be written off by directors and producers once your youth has passed its sell-by date. That's what you should strive for. Even if you can't reach the heights of those A-list stars, you can still establish yourself in Hollywood and gain a foothold." Charlize Theron wasn't born into a wealthy family. As long as she had the will, her parents would naturally pave the way for her. It wasn't that she had abundant resources, support, or a constant stream of film roles. She came to Hollywood for her career, driven not only by her natural beauty but also by a desire for success, even more than a love of acting. She wanted to prove herself, to earn enough wealth to improve her mother's and her own lives. These desires, egged on by Henry, became fuel for a raging fire. Undeterred, she stood up and proudly declared, "Then come on. My fourth performance, no, let's do another." Charlize was puzzled by Henry's suggestion. "Why? I want you to learn the techniques of the actors in the movies and then apply your own acting to the same role. But I'm not trying to transform you into them, so there's no need to repeat the same scene too many times. Let's do another one. I chose that scene last time, and this time it's your turn." Charlize Theron's eyes rolled, instantly crescent-shaped, a smile spreading across them. "Then act out the scene where the hero tries to escape, but is discovered by the heroine, and is smashed on the ankle with a sledgehammer, causing him to be in excruciating pain. You act with me. Find me a hammer." Wow, girl, you're taking revenge. Don't say no. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 304: The Bottleneck of Rising. After changing her agent and starting over, Charlize Theron's daily routine consisted of working, auditioning, watching movies, and honing her acting skills. In her spare time, she would flip through the books Henry recommended, supplementing her knowledge. There were books on psychology, as well as others on actor psychology and technique, particularly the latter. Through this period of imitation practice, she could see herself performing on camera, and by comparing it to the books, Charlize Theron had indeed gained some insights. From an outsider's perspective, Henry saw Charlize Theron's acting skills improving rapidly. While not quite at the level of veteran actors or even actresses, it was no longer embarrassing, though still a bit raw. Henry's responsibilities were much more varied. His most important job, of course, was to drive Charlize to auditions. As long as the film crew wasn't obviously questionable, Henry would take the future actress to try out opportunities. Occasionally, he'd encounter directors or producers who offered hints. Or, if the production team, impressed by Charlize's beauty, would take advantage of her and make ambiguous advances. Henry had to tactfully handle these complications and fend off those with ill intentions. In fact, even after sleeping with someone, denying their involvement is commonplace in Hollywood. Regardless of whether they truly secured an opportunity, the actress paid the price and could often deflect responsibility by claiming they were offered more. After suffering such a loss, could she possibly file a police report or sue? Even a major incident wouldn't be enough. Once a woman's reputation is tarnished and her backers aren't strong enough, she's forced to retire from the industry. This clearly illustrates the vulnerability and predicament of actresses. It's this disparity that gives Hollywood men the impunity to make unreasonable, unspoken demands. Henry understood these tactics. Regardless of whether the person making the suggestion or request held casting power, helping Charlize avoid these complications was part of his job as both agent and boyfriend. Furthermore, Henry also rented a videotape daily to use as teaching material for Charlize. He also served as photographer and instructor, coaching her on camera acting and watching the resulting scenes together. While this task took the longest, it was relatively straightforward. They would spend their days in Henry's house, watching movies, imitating, observing the performances, and analyzing their acting. However, as an agent, Henry had no resources at his disposal, so he could only diligently visit the Screen Actors Guild and check out film crews open for casting. Before even securing an audition, Henry would sometimes personally contact these crews. The big-budget productions from the Big 8 studios were still out of reach for a low-level agent like Henry. So, the only ones he could reach were small, independent film crews starved for both money and talent, or B-movies released directly to video. Contacting these small crews beforehand not only helped him gauge their reliability, but also offered him occasional guidance on any challenges they faced. After all, he had spent several years in Los Angeles and nearly half a year in Hollywood, so he had the inside scoop on the intricacies of the trade to guide even those new to the industry. With these small favors, he secured Charlize numerous auditions. Though not many ultimately succeeded. But thanks to Charlize Theron's talents and Henry's diligent support, he quickly secured her roles as a minor actress. Although she didn't have a speaking role, she did appear on screen. Honestly, thanks to Henry's strong intervention, Charlize Theron's trajectory at this stage was different from what he knew before the time travel. Her first film appearance was in the B-rated horror film Children of the Corn 3, which would later be released directly to video. It was another, equally obscure B-movie, whose release was still uncertain. She managed to get auditions at least once every few days, and a screen time every week or two. Even if it was only for a day or two, and it was mostly just a minor role, a background in someone else's film. For Charlize Theron, a newcomer to the industry, this success was like a ray of hope, a glimmer of hope for success. In any case, it was better than what she'd experienced under her former agent, John Crosby. Under his management, Charlize was limited to modeling photo shoots and never got a film role. Although John had once lent a hand when she needed it most, Charlize remains grateful to him to this day. But his ill intentions were equally elusive. Henry knew full well that moving from a background role to a speaking role was the true breakthrough from 0 to 1. He hadn't even made it that far, so how could he help Charlize Theron make it? Lying in bed, he gently let go of the sleeping girl beside him. Henry dressed and, in the dead of night, went to the dockside warehouse to put the finishing touches on his underwater server construction. This massive contraption had to be completed and launched into the sea before the warehouse's short-term lease expired. Time was running out. As Henry worked, he pondered other matters. After 3 months of working with her, Henry truly felt unqualified as an agent. He was merely an acting instructor, albeit a passable one, with the support of cameras and other equipment. Agents rely on connections and resources. Besides being eloquent and able to secure opportunities and negotiate compensation, what's even more crucial is access to information. Hollywood produces an average of about 700 films a year. Not to mention the big studios and productions, the number of film opportunities that flow into the Screen Actors Guild probably accounts for less than half of the total, or even less. And honestly, the projects that do reach the SAG are often shoddy. The good ones are already scooped up, never ending up in the SAG's fold. The truly well-informed are those at the major agencies or those with celebrity clients. As for snagging a bargain, well, it's not that easy in Hollywood. At least to this day, Henry hasn't encountered a script that he remembers as a potential hit or a truly compelling one. Even if he wanted to take the initiative, he'd need to know who's handling the project so he can prioritize. Frankly, it's a lack of resources and information that's to blame. Faced with this bottleneck, Henry, as an agent, has the time to cultivate his network and expand his sources of information. Actresses with their prime years don't have that much time. While there are some late bloomers who rise to prominence through exceptional acting and experience, their achievements are limited. This doesn't just refer to awards, but also income. And in the process of gaining experience, what kind of effort must be put into staying in Hollywood? Unaffected by other temptations, or even corruption? Actresses who truly reach the top invariably radiate their brilliance during their prime youth. They don't need to hone their acting skills. Simply standing on the big screen can captivate countless young men and women, and only then can they achieve both fame and fortune. During their time together, Henry understood Charlize Theron's attitude well. She wasn't someone who was obsessed with acting, although she pursued it. She simply believed she had the talent and ability to achieve success in this field, and so she put in the effort. Charlize Theron's greater desire was to escape poverty and maintain the meager dignity of an actor, which many powerful figures considered insignificant. She had chosen a path that was, for many, more difficult and arduous. If he didn't want Charlize Theron to waste her life, it was time to resort to some unconventional tactics, Henry thought. Chapter 305 Failed Audition. Finally, the underwater server was completed, just before the warehouse's short-term lease expired. It was transported to the sea, connected to the submarine communications cable, and operational. This took place while Charlize was away working, as Henry spent the remaining time after running around with the Screen Actors Guild and various production crews, completing his agent's work, and secretly working late into the night. To say the construction process was full of twists and turns is an understatement. The final product, roughly the size of a 20-passenger mid-size bus, was transported to its designated underwater location in the middle of the night, and connected to the submarine communications cable. The server's purpose had yet to be determined, but for now, it would run a self-monitoring program, constantly transmitting log files back to Henry's rented computer. Because it was located underwater, it was necessary to monitor its operation to prevent unexpected problems. Only after it was operating stably could other uses be considered. Otherwise, transferring all his important data to it would be destroyed by water the next day, a heartbreaking prospect. In short, the underwater server construction project, which was under pressure from the lease deadline, was temporarily put on hold, allowing Henry to focus his full attention on the future actress. The tricks he was going to use were certainly not eavesdropping to get information, or going to a big shot's house to beat him up and force him to submit. Crime is not an option. Henry simply took advantage of Charlize's interview break to make a phone call he had never made before, to test whether he had enough face. Fortunately, he got a positive response from the other party, which was considered to have passed the first hurdle. When the disappointed girl returned to the car, Henry knew the result without asking. He was thinking about how to comfort her, but Charlize took the initiative. As if to vent her emotions, she slapped her cheeks hard with both hands, and the sound of the slap was extremely crisp. This made Henry feel that his face also hurt. Pulling the girl's hands down, Henry gently stroked Charlize's red cheeks with both hands. "Look, it's all red. What if it swells up? Luckily there aren't any other auditions this afternoon, otherwise you'd have to use a cement trowel to powder your face." "Ah, you need a cement trowel for your makeup." Charlize, her teeth bared, pinched Henry's cheeks and pulled. Unfortunately, she couldn't move the stubborn face, so she gave up angrily. "Ha, don't look for me if you need to vent your anger. I'll buy you a punching doll later. You can punch it whenever you want, and you'll feel much better." Charlize bared her teeth and punched Henry's arm twice. "I love punching those kinds of things. They're free, and they make you scream." "Ouch, ouch," Henry whimpered, seemingly cooperatively, but his voice was perfunctory. Charlize couldn't help but punch him again. Then she folded her hands and turned away. Henry said, "Don't worry. Strictly speaking, it's not your fault that you didn't make the audition today." Meanwhile, Henry started the car and prepared to return to the apartment building. It was almost dinner time, and he had to go home to prepare dinner for Katie. While he was cooking, Charlize could watch the movie that was used as a teaching material today, the first round, because it was still practice time in the evening. The slight vibration caused by the car engine seemed to shake Charlize's insistence on keeping silent. She turned around and looked at the people and asked, "How can you say it's not my fault? While you were waiting and auditioning, I walked around the crowd and heard some gossip." "What kind of gossip?" "Has the leading actress been decided?" "Yes, that's it." "So what?" Charlize pouted, looking unhappy. "I saw the leading actress. Her appearance is different from yours. But the most important thing is that I can't see that star aura in her every move." "Do you know what this means, dear? Are you saying that she is not as good as me, or does she have her own advantages?" I guess you would think so. I think you must have used all your acting skills in the audition just now and amazed everyone. But in the end you were rejected." "That's right. That's it. I just can't figure out what I didn't do well enough," Charlize shouted angrily. "You still don't understand it now, dear? Maybe you did too well," Henry spoke in a calmer voice. This really calmed the girl who was trapped in her emotions. Charlize Theron is not a fool. Now that she thinks about the previous situation, she realizes something. He asked, "Even if I don't get the leading actress, I was originally auditioning for a supporting role, right? So they still don't want me." "I don't know the leading actress's background, but you can come up with 100 reasons why the crew couldn't move her. What if, at this point, the crew chose a supporting actress who was superior in every way? What do you think would happen, giving priority to the superior actress? That wouldn't be good, Charlize said angrily, her cheeks puffed up. Henry smiled. You think it's impossible, so you're speaking that way, right? When making a movie, casting actors isn't always about the best, but the most suitable. That suitable can refer to an actor's appearance, traits, salary level, and the overall crew's inclinations. Personal connections are also a very important consideration. Actually, this is my fault. I didn't understand the crew's situation and tell you in advance. This is the only opportunity I could find. Honestly, it's not a truly successful project, but Charlize made the transition herself, looking at him with a slight irritation, waiting for Henry's next words. Sensing the deathly gaze from the passenger seat, Henry smiled and said, no buts. The lack of a surprising turn of events at least made her feel a little better. Charlize tilted her head glumly, staring out the window at the streetscape of people wearing coats. Los Angeles rarely snowed, and her hometown never did either. Inexplicably, she longed to go somewhere snowy, to roll around in the snow. By the way, honey, Henry's voice made Charlize's ears perk up, but she didn't turn, still staring out the window. Don't make plans for Christmas and New Year's. I'll take you to see someone. This vague request made Charlize Theron stiffen. Could this man be going down that same path, bringing her to others as a tribute, in exchange for opportunities? We're going to Connecticut to meet Katharine Hepburn. I heard it's snowing there. Do you have enough warm clothes? If not, we need to go buy some first. Charlize Theron whipped her head around, nearly breaking her neck. She looked at the man driving in surprise. You mean, that Katharine Hepburn lady? I think it's the Katharine Hepburn lady you're talking about. I'll be Ms. Audrey Hepburn's assistant. It was this Ms. Hepburn who introduced me. Do you want to go? Charlize nodded frantically, her eyes wide open like a hamster. Being the first female star to be called the Queen of Hollywood was exactly what she had dreamed of becoming. How could Charlize Theron pass up the opportunity to meet her in person? Chapter 306 Seaside Villa. Katharine Hepburn's father was a physician, and her mother was a feminist. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a family that could afford to raise 7 children required a certain level of wealth. Therefore, the family had another summer home outside of Hartford, in Fenwick, Connecticut, on the shores of Long Island Sound. After the hurricane of '38 swept the original wooden shingle cottage out to sea, they rebuilt a brick house in its place. The house had a unique design, resembling building blocks or dominoes. There was a 1-story house, a 2-story house, and the largest, 3 stories with an attic, followed by another 2-story house with a balcony. The 4 houses connected together, like a family of different ages supporting each other. This was the home Katharine Hepburn would return to between filmings. It was also one of the places she lived in her later years, the other being in New York. It was said that Howard Stark often landed in his seaplane on the bay in front of her house. Of course, in Henry's memories before his time travel, the protagonist of this romantic anecdote was Howard Hughes. It was Henry, along with Charlize Theron, who drove a rental car from the airport to visit Katharine Hepburn, who lived there. They arrived in the afternoon. They could have arrived earlier, but Connecticut had been snowing for the past few days, making the road slippery. Henry didn't dare drive fast. The snow wasn't enough to warrant snow chains, but the roads were slippery more than usual. So, for safety-conscious Henry, driving slowly was a natural choice. The beach in front of the house was also covered in a blanket of white snow. The waves crashed onto the shore, not only soaking the sand, but also mixing salt and snow, which were then carried away by the receding waves. This scene was a strange sight for Henry. It wasn't that Henry had never seen snow before. His memories of snow on the beach in Alaska were indeed there. But the sea was frozen solid, so there was no sight of waves playing in the snow. After finding a spot to park, Henry and Charlize Theron arrived and rang the doorbell. A moment later, an elderly woman, dressed in a floral gown, warm fleece pants, and a woolen sweater, opened the door. "Katharine, long time no see," Henry said warmly, handing over a bouquet of bright red roses. "Hello, good girl," the elderly woman said, giving him an equally enthusiastic kiss on the cheek. After greeting Henry, Katharine looked at the stranger with a strange expression. She was wearing a coat the same bright red as the roses, with white fur trimmings along the collar and hem. Even her hat was the same style, with a ball of white fur on the tip. This combination prompted Katharine to casually exclaim, "You're Santa Claus." The girl, who had been smiling, now speechless with nervousness, instinctively punched the smirking man beside her at such a comment. This coat was a gift from Henry for her, as she lacked a snow-proof winter coat. It was supposedly an extra from the family, and the style was indeed rather masculine. It was indeed quite different from the classic Santa Claus look, but it was hard not to draw that line of thought. Not wanting to get a runny nose from the cold, Charlize compromised. But then, being reminded again, she couldn't help but punch the man next to her. Finally remembering where she was, Charlize quickly greeted, "Ms. Hepburn, nice to meet you. I'm Charlize Theron. I brought a bottle of champagne, I hope you like it." Katharine Hepburn looked surprised and said, "Oh, those who bring alcohol are my close friends." After accepting the paper bag, she lowered her voice to Charlize like a child snitching, "You know, my roommates are so controlling. They don't let me eat this, they don't let me drink that. I feel like my world is falling apart." Henry and Charlize could only smile awkwardly. "Come in. It's cold outside. Come in and warm yourself by the fire." Katharine slowly made her way inside. The house was very quiet, except for the roaring fire in the fireplace, which occasionally crackled. After the two entered, they hung their coats on the hanger next to the door. Charlize Theron wore a well-fitting blue-green dress with white dots, not too formal, but not too rude either. Henry nimbly helped Katharine prepare the vase and place the bouquet in it. He also helped open the iron band of the champagne bottle, slightly loosening the cork. Katharine excitedly pushed the cork open, and the sound of pop made her laugh excitedly. Then 3 glasses of champagne were poured, and she couldn't wait to take a big sip herself. She wasn't a heavy drinker, but she hadn't tasted it in a long time. It was more of a feeling of nostalgia than a fondness. The 3 of them sat down by the fireplace. Henry took a look at the layout of the house. It had a strong family atmosphere, not like the place where an elderly person lived alone. But it was particularly quiet today. "Katharine, you said you have a cohabitant. Where are they?" "That's my brother, Richard, and his family. During the Christmas holidays, their whole family went out for vacation. I didn't go with them after I got your call." "Oh, sorry. Did I disturb your family trip?" Katharine shook her head and said, "No, I would rather be alone. On weekdays, the house is noisy, with a bunch of kids running around, which makes me feel overwhelmed. I finally get a vacation, but they insisted on taking me with them. Your call can be said to have saved my life. Besides, I don't care where they are going. I am Katharine Hepburn. Except for heaven and hell, where in this world have I not been?" Henry joked. "Oh, did you go to the moon with Neil Armstrong and Colonel Aldrin, you kid?" Katharine flung her hands in disgust at this guy who found a flaw in just one sentence. The 3 of them gathered around the fireplace, listening to Katharine complain about the brats of her brother's family. In terms of seniority, they were her great-grandchildren, the 4th generation. Although every word was a complaint, one could actually hear concern in it. Otherwise, who would care about a child who was dressed so fat that he couldn't even walk, and then actually rolled down the stairs, ignoring the adults' concerns and laughing heartlessly? Or he would pull her ears all day long, telling her what she could eat and drink. She could only eat a few bites, and if she did, she had to drink a lot. Her doctor father was not so nagging. Charlize Theron liked this feeling very much, even with a little yearning. She was still very unfamiliar with her, but she immediately started chatting with Katharine. Henry, who used to talk a lot, couldn't get involved in the conversation between the 2 women. He became a heartless answering machine, only responding with "oh," and "hem." Chapter 307 Christmas Dinner. Katharine and Henry, who was visiting, prepared dinner together. Besides what they had at home, Henry also picked up some fresh produce at the supermarket on the way over. Considering her nearly 90 years old, it was impossible to prepare anything rich and salty. In fact, even Katharine couldn't handle strong flavors. She just liked to complain about being forbidden. Take the champagne Charlize brought. Katharine only took a big first sip. The rest was just enough to moisten her lips, with Henry and Charlize swallowing most of the drink. Although he wasn't a licensed nutritionist, Henry could still make people's meals delicious and nutritious. Food that was tasty but salty, or nutritious but tasteless, simply meant that their employers weren't paying their nutritionists or chefs enough, so they resorted to such wasteful food. Catering to all these needs wasn't that difficult. It just took a little ingenuity and effort. So, the 3 non-blood-related friends prepared a sumptuous Christmas dinner for themselves. Even though Christmas hadn't officially arrived yet, the dinner Henry had prepared was uniquely varied. Even if they only took a bite of each, It was enough to fill the two women present. But there was no need to worry about leftovers, as Henry devoured everything on the table, practically devouring both the plate and the knife. Although Charlize and Catherine had both witnessed Henry's appetite, seeing it firsthand still made them, actresses who must maintain their figure, feel envious. Even though one of them was already semi-retired, her age still restricted her from overeating. Catherine watched the man shoveling food gracefully, and for some reason, she felt a strange irritation. "Henry, don't you think you're overweight? How much do you weigh now?" He ate and spoke naturally. Henry replied, 200 pounds. "I weighed myself a while ago. It's not a big belly, after all." Unlike women who are secretive about their weight, Henry was frank to an irritating degree. And besides, one's own business is one's own business. Henry wasn't the skinny, effeminate type, but he wasn't a sumo wrestler either. He had the build of a heavyweight fighter, large, but not the muscular bodybuilder. As for actual strength, considering his Kryptonian build, he wouldn't blow up the earth with one punch, but he could certainly flatten a mountain. It was just his lack of defined muscle that made him look fat to some. To a jealous woman, he was nothing. To the first Hollywood queen, Katharine Hepburn, he looked like a chicken. She slapped Henry's claws at the last pudding in disgust, splitting it with Charlize. After all, the dessert pudding was made for each person, one per person. No matter how the two women insisted they were full, stuffed, or had no more, they didn't let go of the pudding. As they snatched the last pudding from Henry's hands, looking aggrieved, and shared it, their moods fluctuated between heaven and hell, more sour than a sauna. While marveling at the deliciousness of the dessert, he simultaneously dreaded the exorbitant calorie count. Just one bite, and I'd have to run several more kilometers tomorrow to burn it off. Then another bite, and another. Henry sat nearby, watching the two swallow their puddings with expressions of regret on their faces. But as long as they had something in their mouths, they felt as if they were in heaven. Their expressions kept changing. Their facial expressions were so impressive that one couldn't help but admit that these two were truly worthy actors. It was a shame the camera was in Los Angeles. Otherwise, this scene would have been captured, a permanent record. After their meal, the three of them, Henry and Charlize, worked together to wash the dishes. Then they sat down at the table and opened a bottle of aged red wine that Catherine had just retrieved from the cellar. The label was so old it was blurry. The old woman pushed the bottle toward Henry, and the Kryptonian guest, of course, opened it without a second thought. Corks like this one from older wines are quite difficult to handle. If you're not careful, they can easily break, and the broken cork could fall into the wine. While this won't affect the wine's flavor, it will still leave chunks of it, which can be quite disturbing. But this wasn't a big deal for Henry. Catherine had all the tools she needed to open the bottle. So, Henry first used a blade roughly the size of a needle to scrape the edge of the cork where it met the bottle, loosening the adhesion. Then, he slowly twisted the corkscrew into the aged cork. He didn't need to do it too quickly, as this would damage the brittle cork. Finally, he pulled the cork out with moderate force. Neither too quickly nor with excessive force, otherwise, only the loosened part would come out, leaving the entire cork stuck in the bottle. Henry performed this operation slowly and meticulously. There was no other way. If he had been too rough, everyone would have been left with wine soaked in broken corks. Yet, this very slow movement was unexpectedly beautiful. Catherine and Charlize watched Henry's actions in awe, unable to look away for even a moment. When the cork was smoothly extracted, leaving no trace, both women practically cried out in unison. As the cork was removed, the aroma of the wine immediately struck Henry's nose. With his exceptional sense of smell, he had never before experienced such a complex red wine. It wasn't a strange, unpleasant odor, but rather the subtle, self-contained flavor of an aged wine, brewing a new fragrance after years of aging. Henry poured a small sip, swirled it in his glass, sniffed it, and then drank it down in one gulp. Like a seasoned sommelier, he acted like a seasoned sommelier. It still needs to be decanted, Charlize exclaimed in surprise. Wow, I can smell it right here. Does it still need to be decanted? He poured a small sip into each of their glasses. Try it fresh from the bottle. This wine will taste even better after decanting. Meanwhile, Henry poured the wine into a decanter. He held the bottom of the bottle, his thumb wedged into the groove at the base. Grape-colored liquid trickled down like silk. This action allowed more of the wine to air out, accelerating the oxidation process and releasing its flavor. Even the first sip left Charlize staring in awe. While she wasn't a sommelier and had never tasted truly fine wine, she could clearly sense the extraordinary nature of the contents. "Catherine, what kind of wine is this?" "It's delicious, it's a gift from Howard. It's said to be from Hitler's cellar, captured by the Allies. It contained a special brew commissioned by Napoleon to celebrate his ascension to the throne. It's said only 5 bottles were ever produced." The Kryptonian's hand froze mid-pour. He smiled awkwardly at the old woman sniffing at the empty glass. Goodness! This wasn't just old wine, it was a cultural relic. Napoleon was crowned in 1804, and this year is 1994. Exactly 190 years old. Even without considering the age of the wine, its commemorative value is limitless. It was brewed on Napoleon's coronation order, and it was part of Hitler's collection. If it were put up for auction, it would easily be worth a few houses. Chapter 308, Romance in the Golden Age. It's already opened, so drink it. Kryptonians, being so outspoken, have no worries. You can just pour the contents of the decanter back into the bottle, put the cork back in, and pretend nothing happened. Unlike high-proof spirits, red wine begins to oxidize once exposed to air, a process that's irreversible and unstoppable. If left for too long, it will deteriorate. Due to its high alcohol content, spirits don't deteriorate with air. Or, even if they do, the signs are minimal. So, while spirits can be enjoyed slowly after opening, red wine can't. Saying no to wine after opening it is a true waste. And those preservation methods, like sealing the bottle, only slightly slow the deterioration process. So, if you can still drink it, it's best to finish it as soon as possible after opening. As for Charlize Theron, after hearing Catherine's explanation, her mind wandered, her soul drifting away. Although she wasn't well educated, she knew names like Napoleon and Hitler. And who else could Katharine Hepburn be referring to as Howard besides Howard Stark? Take the tiny sip she just took, for example. It barely soothed her throat. Perhaps all her salary since she started working couldn't even afford it. No. Perhaps even if she worked her whole life, she still wouldn't be able to afford it. Shocked and disheartened, Charlize Theron began to question her own life. As for the elderly woman who had brought out the bottle, she certainly didn't harbor such negative emotions. She simply gazed at the wine in the decanter with a wistful gaze. "This bottle of wine was a gift from Howard when he proposed to me. He said we'd drink it together on our golden wedding anniversary. But as you all know, he married Maria, and I didn't, so, that playboy has found a new love." "Isn't that surprising?" Henry said, examining the label, trying to decipher something. Catherine smiled. "That's not the case. He and Maria happened later. It was probably in 1938 when Hollywood criticized me as a box office poison. Disheartened, I left Hollywood for the first time. Howard wanted to continue this relationship, but in 1939, World War II broke out. Although he did not join the army, he became a scientific and technological advisor to the U.S. military. His focus was always on the war. That's when I met Spencer again. I was fascinated by him at first sight and could never get rid of his charm until the old guy passed away. That was in 1967. At this time, Howard had already married Maria. I mean, even if he was still single at the time, I couldn't accept him right away. Gossip about the Golden Age, told by the person himself. Just listening to it was so satisfying that Henry almost crossed his legs and whistled. However, it was not good to show his gossip-watching attitude too obviously. The red wine in the decanter seemed to be gradually waking up from a deep sleep, and its rich aroma began to diffuse. Henry poured himself another small sip and drank it down in one gulp, using the same wine-tasting technique. "Well, we have to wait a little longer. But the wine has begun to sober up, and the flavor is slowly coming out. You can also try it." He poured a small sip for each of the two ladies. Charlize Theron seemed to be still in her trance and just drank it mechanically. But the moment the wine entered her mouth, she felt an explosion of taste. All the taste buds were stimulated and active almost at the same time, scrambling to transmit information to the brain. Charlize was shocked, speechless again. Catherine's performance was not as bad as Charlize's. She just had shining eyes, amazed at the changes in this red wine and the previous ones. Then she shook the empty wine glass with lingering desire and sniffed the aroma of the wine in the glass. Catherine was caught off guard and made a surprise attack and asked, "Kids, you come to an old woman like me, you don't come to hear about the romantic affairs of my youth, do you? Tell me, what do you want to do?" Henry told her about Charlize Theron, of course omitting some of the more embarrassing things. For example, the two met because Charlize was so hungry that she stole bread from a restaurant, and she was tricked into being a Playboy photo model. Of course, the latter was mentioned briefly, but the details were not given. But with Catherine's knowledge of Hollywood, even without saying those things, she could probably imagine the whole process. "So, you want me to help introduce you to a reliable agent?" Catherine asked. In fact, when talking about topics related to Charlize, she had already come back to her senses. It was just out of trust that she did not interrupt Henry's statement. What he said was not far from the facts. But Henry's request shocked Charlize herself. "The two of them have not been working together for a few months, and you are going to give up on me?" Perhaps it was because of the continuous training of acting skills during this period. Charlize's expression was always able to express her feelings appropriately. So her disappointment at this time was quite obvious, but she was not disappointed in others, but disappointed in herself. Henry quickly explained, "My dear, it's not that you performed poorly, but that I am not capable enough to play the role of an agent. When I initially offered to be your agent, I underestimated the difficulty of the job. But after these past 2 or 3 months, you've probably realized we don't get the good projects, and we can't get any with lines. The only opportunities I could get you were with low-tier film crews, so I hope to find you a reliable, capable agent. I'll continue to help you with other things, too. There's no way I'm just going to abandon you like this." Understanding Henry's thoughts finally made Charlize's expression more relaxed. The little girl almost jumped on the other person and hugged and bid him again. This was also a small sequelae of the intensive acting training in recent days. Her emotions were too outward, and she was not yet at the level of being able to control them freely. So many times, her emotional expressions would be quite direct. Henry certainly noticed this abnormal phenomenon. And according to his experience and the psychology books he had read, people with obvious emotional ups and downs are prone to getting stuck in a dead end. So Henry usually pays attention to Charlize's expression changes, and can't let her inexplicably have thoughts like, "As a human being, I'm sorry." Of course, the interaction between the two was seen by Katharine Hepburn, and of course she could understand it. If there was no such relationship, how could two strangers do this for each other? But as an elder, she always has to check on the children she likes. Hollywood has everything, and the most common ones are fleeting romances and people who say one thing and do another. Chapter 309, Old Matters Revisited. Catherine quickly came up with an idea and said, "Little Henry, if you want to help Charlize, don't you think you're the most powerful backer? Didn't Tony want you to take over as CEO of Stark Films? While it might not be as good as the Big 8 today, it's still inferior to those second-tier film production companies, but that's simply because Stark Films isn't focusing on film production. If you take over, you can create a film yourself to promote her, which would be better than asking an agent to search for a needle in a haystack." Charlize Theron was speechless upon hearing this. Her eyes nearly bulged out, her mouth opening and closing, unsure of what to say. Even Henry was speechless when Catherine brought up the matter again. Was this a roundabout way of doing things, like Monkey King finding himself in the palm of Buddha's hand again? It was indeed a method Henry had considered before. It only lasted a moment before he suppressed the idea. Although the invitation at the beginning of the year hadn't been explicitly rejected or accepted, it had ended on bad terms. So naturally, Henry let it go. Even if he shamelessly went back to that person and asked for the job, who knew if he'd still be willing to offer the job? Little did he know, things were different now. Always prepared to assume the worst, Henry didn't really care about face or dignity. In the world of martial arts, those who fought for a moment were respectable people, and those who fought for a stick of incense were Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. What was there for a barefoot person like me to fight for? When it's time to kneel, kneel gracefully. Making money is nothing to be ashamed of. But getting slapped in the face without any benefit would be a waste of time. Thinking of a possibility, Henry asked, "Catherine, was it Tony who asked you to bring this up again?" The old woman shook her head. "No. I'm just curious. He offered you this opportunity at the beginning of the year. But until now, I haven't heard anything. Is there any unresolved problem between you?" After sniffing the aroma of the wine in the decanter, Henry added the rare red wine to the glasses of the three people. Then he took a big sip. "I don't know how much Catherine knows, but judging from Tony's attitude at the time, she probably wouldn't say too much." Henry chose his words carefully and said, "I did put forward some conditions and doubts to Tony, and then there was no response. I think that no response may be a kind of response. Of course, I will not bother that busy man again. He and I live in two different worlds, and there is no intersection. As Henry spoke, he reflected on another situation. Could it be that Catherine's bringing this up was also a subtle way of expressing her feelings? When someone wants to refuse something but can't say no directly, isn't it simply a way of making awkward requests, hoping the other party will give up? Just like the doubts and questions he had raised with Tony Stark, wasn't it simply to hope that the young master would dispel his unrealistic ideas and stop involving himself? The wine in his glass was a rare treasure, but for some reason, Henry found it bland. Perhaps because Henry's feelings were clearly reflected on his face, Catherine flicked his head with a finger. I always feel like you're being rude and impersonal with your thoughts. Don't ruin my good wine with your gloomy mood, Catherine. Henry held his forehead in his hand, looking at the sharp-tongued old woman with a look of grievance. I feel bad that little Tony is the only one left in the Stark family. And his awful personality means he won't have many friends, so from my perspective, I hope you'll help him. What can I do for him? Give him a heart attack soon? If I could, I'm sure he'd be happy to put a few bullets in my head and send me back to God. That's why I think a friend like you is so important to him. Henry reached out and pressed his hand against the old woman's forehead. Catherine, do you have a fever? Smacking the brat's rude hand away, Catherine said seriously, you don't understand. People like him rarely have friends who are willing to tell the truth. Most of them are flatterers. Howard was so fascinated by me because I dared to tell the truth in front of him. I wasn't like other girls, who would just be submissive and afraid to express their opinions. It's just that Howard was not good when he was young. He didn't learn his lesson. Even if he got punched, he would be fine 3 days later. He was still a tough guy. It wasn't until he gave birth to Tony that he calmed down a little. What I want to say is, I don't know where you got the courage to embarrass the Starks. But at least what you said to him can cool their impulsive passion and look at things more calmly. If it were true that he was the only one who needed you before, I might not have said these words. But now, it seems that you need him too. Why can't the two of you work together and get what you need? I thought you understood this kind of thing. Yeah, why did I dare to embarrass the Starks? Thinking back on my attitude toward the X-Men, no matter how they initially treated me, my reaction was a bit too harsh and impolite. Why? Now that I reflect on it, it's because I'm sure they have the superhero element in their personalities, and they always stick to a certain limit in what they do and say. That's why I dare to offend them so recklessly, because I have a rough idea of where that limit is. Conversely, when facing opponents whose backgrounds I don't know, my attitude softens a lot. As long as they don't cross my line, no matter what they do, I don't care much. This is a bit of bullying. So, when I get to Tony Stark, does it mean that I really hate him? Or is it simply a hatred of the rich? Or, I think that as long as I am in a position to criticize these superheroes, even to control their life and death, then I am a person superior to them. Such a stupid and self-satisfied mentality. It seems that there is something wrong with his mentality. Realizing this, Henry sighed slightly. Catherine, could you please make an appointment with that young master? I'm afraid that if I call him myself, he might not even respond. Henry showed an attitude of compromise, and Catherine was of course overjoyed. Okay, I'll call him. Ask him to come over and talk to you in the next few days. Are you guys in a hurry to get back to Los Angeles? If not, then stay here. I have a guest room here, which is much more comfortable than staying in a hotel or some shabby inn. The only condition is that you have to take care of an old lady. I think one room is enough for the two of you. The old lady smiled like an ant and raised her eyebrows slightly. Chapter 310 Sincerity and Temptation. Charlize Theron was actually completely dazed during the latter part of the conversation. Henry led her to the guest room, unloading their luggage from the car. She couldn't even remember how she'd washed herself, and after changing into her pajamas, she sat on the bed, her eyes blank. She watched Henry, who had showered behind her, enter the room and towel his hair. As Charlize gradually regained consciousness, her expression was complex, her eyes unfocused. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. Noticing Charlize's antics, Henry said calmly, "Speak up. Don't hold it in." "Well, I was trying to tell you that you don't have to force yourself into doing things you don't want to do just because of me. But I was afraid you'd think I was being sarcastic, trying to push you into doing something. Honestly, I didn't mean it that way. Having auditioned frequently in Hollywood lately and interacted with so many film crews, Charlize Theron, while not yet a complete sage of the world, has certainly been enlightened. Those with even a tiny bit of power act with impunity. Charlize couldn't imagine how Tony Stark would behave, or the immense pressure Henry faced. Looking at Charlize Theron's fearful expression, it was hard to imagine her future evolution into a South African diamond. Henry soothed, "I understand what you mean, don't worry, but I'm telling you this, I didn't initially consider this approach because my becoming the CEO of Stark Films wouldn't be as helpful to you as you might imagine. If you just want to be on camera, play a leading role, and gain some publicity, then it wouldn't be difficult for me to become CEO and launch a few projects to support you. But if you want to achieve success in acting, what you really need are good projects, not the opportunity to be praised. Do you understand the difference? And once I become the CEO of Stark Films, I can no longer be your agent because it would be a conflict of interest. An agent can't stand on the actor's side and fight for the treatment they deserve. That's legally prohibited. Of course, there are benefits. At least you'll have a strong backer. There will probably be fewer people like those making unreasonable demands. But don't think you won't encounter such people. There are always some who are too bold. They're either higher ranking than the CEO of Stark Films, or they control the real core resources. Is that so? Charlize Theron said dejectedly, her mind in a state of confusion. Henry pressed the girl's head and said, "Success is never easy. And movies aren't just for a small circle, for self-entertainment, they have to be open to the public. It needs either awards and good reputation, or box office success. If they don't have either, theater owners are not fools. They would rather let their theaters be empty than show some worthless film. Don't be fooled by the glamorous aura of an actor." With the failure of Cleopatra, Elizabeth Taylor became the biggest target. But how could the mistakes of that film be entirely caused by the leading actress? To reach the top, you certainly need a lot of external support. But don't assume that just because you have these supporters, you can sit back and enjoy the fruits of your labor. Those helpers can become demons that drag you down at any time. Charlize suddenly asked, "What about you? Will you also become a demon?" "I would never do anything to hurt you, you can trust me." Although he spoke with such determination, Henry smiled wryly and said, "But I have my own problems," as if returning to the time when she first met this man. Charlize looked at him. To say that she was completely oblivious to the little anomalies in their lives would be self-deception. It was only when she was most vulnerable that he repeatedly offered a helping hand. It was like seeing the light in the abyss, making Charlize Theron unwilling to think about those things. Now that it was mentioned, how could she not be curious? Faced with such a look, Henry was at a loss for words, not knowing where to begin. In the end, he could only say, "I will do my best to prevent those troubles from involving you, but there are many things in the world that are not determined by my own thoughts." What if one day you feel? Before he could finish his words, Henry's mouth was blocked. A passionate kiss may seem to solve many problems, but in reality, it solves nothing. But at the moment, there was no need for further words between the two. Their hearts were connected, and that seemed to be enough. Just as they were about to take it a step further, Charlize suddenly sneezed, spraying saliva all over Henry's face. There was no feeling of anger or embarrassment between the two. Instead, they looked at each other and chuckled. "Looks like I need to turn up the heat." Henry wiped his face with a towel he used to wipe his hair, while searching for the room's air conditioner control. Charlize only then noticed that her pajamas were a little thin for the Connecticut winter. Goosebumps formed under the cold. Henry tucked her into the quilt and tucked the bed in. "Go to bed early. You and Catherine get along best, so talk to her more tomorrow. Instead of helping you find a suitable agent, she has a lot of experience as an actress that I can't tell you. Those things are just as important as having a good agent. She can't write a textbook and tell you everything word for word. You can only ask yourself. So stay alert. I'll take care of the rest. But I need to go out and wash my face first. Good night." "Okay, good night." Henry turned off the bedroom light, leaving a nightlight on, and walked out of the guest room. After wiping his face briefly in the bathroom, Henry returned to the living room fireplace. Grandma Catherine was still awake. She poured herself a glass of Napoleon Coronation red wine and drank it while waiting for someone. At another seat, an empty wine glass was waiting. Henry knew the grandma was waiting for him. "Catherine, why are you still awake?" Henry naturally picked up the decanter and poured the last bit of wine into the empty glass. It's hard to imagine that since dinner, the wine in the decanter has taken on a completely different appearance. It can be said that each stage of drinking has its own unique flavor. You shouldn't drink this kind of wine, it's none of your business. This is a treasure between Howard and me. I don't want it to become my inheritance, Catherine retorted. In fact, you can see that the label of the wine is no longer legible. Apart from Howard's statement, I have no other way to prove the origin of the wine. And Howard was quite stupid at that time. Can you believe it? He was wanted by the US government as a spy. He also used a bottle of this wine to propose to a girl who was already in love with another man, and didn't take it away afterwards. Fortunately, it tasted quite good. Which should prove his thoughts at the time, and that it was not a joke to make fun of me. I have always wanted to return this wine to him, and later wanted to drink it with him and his wife. But there is no chance anymore. I'm afraid that if I wait any longer, I will never know the taste of this wine. After drinking the last of the wine in her glass, Catherine seemed to have said goodbye to the past and looked refreshed. Turning to ask, "Did the child say anything to you?" A simple question, and Henry suddenly came to his senses. He showed a helpless and bitter smile. "Are you testing Charlize by saying those words?" "So I want to know how the child reacted, Catherine. This is not good. People's hearts cannot stand being tested. Regardless of whether the result is disappointing or not, testing someone means that even the most basic trust does not exist. If the result is unsatisfactory, there will be no room for redemption. I don't like this, little Henry, you are right. But she is your girl, and I just met her for the first time. You don't think all old women are like gypsy crones, who can tell people's past and present lives by looking at them? I need to know if she is worth my help." Helplessly, Henry could only recount what had just happened. Finally, he added, "I didn't help Charlize lie or distort the facts. Those were indeed her own words. It seems that she is also a good child, yes. Otherwise, I would not like her. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels." Chapter 311 Preparing Dinner. Charlize Theron wasn't the type to please others. In fact, due to her unspoken past, she was actually quite wary of strangers. Henry's ability to gain access to her heart felt somewhat like taking advantage of her vulnerability. However, Henry had no intention of exploiting her, which helped their relationship endure. As for physical needs, that was another matter. Katharine Hepburn was no pushover either. She was humorous, intelligent, and possessed the strength that women of her era aspired to. Henry had originally envisioned a meeting between two women of such strong personalities as a clash of kings. He had dared to bring Charlize to meet this man, hoping that the still unfinished Charlize Theron would be able to more tactfully interact with this film industry veteran, drawing inspiration from her life experiences and paving the way for her own film career. But who knew that the old and the young, like kindred spirits, would become so engrossed in their conversation that they would forget all about Henry, treating him like a mere servant serving tea and water. But hanging around there all the time was really annoying. Catherine simply said, "Henry, go buy some ingredients and prepare dinner tonight. Tony will be coming over too, so don't poison him." The old lady saw through Henry's intention first, so he had to give up on classic diarrhea-inducing dishes like hairy crab with persimmon, spinach and tofu, pumpkin and fish soup, and lemon shrimp. As the saying goes, when the farmer's calendar changes, even the chef has troubles. But Henry still generously spared the young master's stomach. In the afternoon, the doorbell rang. Henry was busy in the kitchen, and Catherine was not so mobile, so Charlize went to answer the door. When Charlize opened the door, she didn't see Tony Stark as she had seen on TV. Instead, she saw a fat, black man, followed by a group of people of all colors. Charlize was stunned and asked, "Excuse me, who are you looking for?" The big black man in the lead handed over a business card and said, "Hello, Mom. I'm Wesley Washington, the head chef of Wesley's 5-star catering team. Mr. Tony Stark has commissioned us to prepare the dinner. Is this Miss Katharine Hepburn's home?" The arrogance of the rich is that even when they visit someone else's home, they will bring their own chef. This opened Charlize Theron's eyes. Catherine in the back asked loudly, "Little Charlize, who's coming?" "Little Tony, no, Catherine. It's the chef team invited by Mr. Stark." "Really? Then let them in, and tell Henry in the kitchen to stop working, okay?" After responding to the back, Charlize immediately opened the door and welcomed everyone in. "Come in." After getting permission, The catering team immediately took action. Some people unloaded the ingredients from the refrigerated truck, while others unloaded the boxed tableware from the ordinary truck. The catering team is not just chefs and kitchen helpers, but also includes outside waiters, a total of more than 20 people. As the chef and person in charge, Lao He had to know where the kitchen and restaurant were before he could arrange things. So he asked Charlize to lead the way, and the two of them walked towards the kitchen together. Seeing the back of the busy man, Charlize said, "Henry, Mr. Stark has invited a team of catering chefs. This is Chef Wesley Washington." Henry put down the things in his hands and turned his head. Lao He was stunned for a moment, pointed at the other party, and asked uncertainly, "Henry Brown? Ah, chef, long time no see. I didn't expect you to still remember me." After drying his hands, Henry and the chef who had worked together in Devil Warrior played a fist bump salute. "I didn't expect you to be a guest today too." The fat old black man greeted Henry cheerfully at first. Then he looked worried. "Are you and Mr. Stark okay? Would a big shot like him care about a small shrimp like me?" "I'd have been fine a long time ago." "That's good. I was worried that someone would secretly ask me to add some poison or laxative or something," Old Black joked. He looked at the kitchen and asked, "Are you preparing dinner yet? I didn't expect you to come. If you don't want to go hungry, of course you have to cook it yourself." "What are you going to cook?" Old Black couldn't guess Henry's plan just by looking at the ingredients and the preparation, so he asked directly. "Just some home-cooked meals, whatever I can buy, I cook." I didn't think too much about it. "What about you? You won't be like me, improvising, will you?" "How could that be? Thanks to your cheese beef burger, Mr. Stark often hires my team." "Of course, that dish is also on the menu today, it's the one he always requests," Lao He said as he handed over a menu. This was not for people to order, but what everyone could eat today. However, the content was not strictly based on Western food standards, with appetizers, side dishes, and main courses. There were at least 3 main courses on the menu: cheese beef burger, Marseille's fish soup, and duck confit. Looking at the menu, Henry exclaimed in admiration, "Wow, is this what rich people eat?" "Chef, how good is this menu at your level?" Lao He pretended to be mysterious and said in a low voice, "Although I really want to tell you that I always serve top-notch food, there are actually levels. Mr. Stark wants real top-notch ingredients." "Oh, let me see how top-notch they are," Henry joked. He happened to see a few people pushing in a water tank that was still being inflated. This one glance made Henry dumbfounded. "Is the fish tank what I thought it was? I remember hearing you say that you worked on a crab boat in Alaska. You can't fail to recognize it, right? King Crab." "Of course I recognize King Crab. But a live one, aren't you going too far? It's December now, and the crab season is over. Where can we get a live one?" "This is Norwegian red king crab. There is no seasonal restriction there, only a monthly quota. To get this tank, the shipping cost is more expensive than the king crab." Tisk 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 tisk, the life of rich people, I really can't imagine. At this time, Charlize Theron finally found a chance to interrupt and asked, "Henry, do you know Mr. Washington?" "Ah, Wesley Washington, a top chef from the French Le Cordon Bleu. We were in the same film crew, so we knew each other." Of course, Henry did not forget to introduce each other, and said to Lao He, "Charlize Theron, my girlfriend, it's an honor to meet you, beautiful Miss Theron." Old Black smiled innocently, revealing his 2 rows of naturally white teeth. Henry briefly talked about his acquaintance with Old Black. Of course, he did not forget to emphasize that he had enjoyed many free meals. Charlize said in surprise, "What level of film crew actually hired such a team of chefs, the one we had today? The crew with Mr. Tony Stark as the main sponsor? Oh, my God." Charlize was speechless. Old Black added on the side, "But I have only taken on the catering work for a film crew that once. The average film producer would not agree to spend money on such a place." After answering Charlize's question, Henry looked at Old Black and asked, "Do you need my help today?" "Hey, you're a guest. Offer your mouth to help eat, don't steal my business." Chapter 312 The Arrival of a Distinguished Guest. Before dinner, Tony Stark finally showed up at the Hepburn family's beachfront villa. The bearded, pretentious man grumbled the moment he entered, "Catherine, why didn't you come to the old house on East 49th Street to see me? Why did you ask me to come all the way to Connecticut? You know it took me 2 hours just to get here by car. Your dad's much smarter. He even knew how to fly a seaplane." Queen Catherine delivered a powerful blow, and little Tony Stark's defenses were broken again. He didn't know how to respond. But the old lady wasn't just taunting, she had to maintain Tony's dignity in front of others. She explained, "The house on East 49th Street has a lot of stairs. Richard and the others suggested I move, or get an apartment with an elevator. Before that, they brought me back to live by the sea. Do you think I'd agree? A bunch of old and young people kept nagging me all day." Tony was about to say something, but Catherine spoke first. "Don't give me any advice and learn those bad habits that people hate. Why don't you just persuade me to move to the moon?" Tony took a step back and made a zipper-like gesture on his mouth. The talk of moving to the moon was an exaggeration, and he couldn't do it. Well, not yet. The current CEO of Stark Industries certainly didn't come alone. He brought not only a group of men in black suits headed by Happy Hogan, but also several men and women who were no older than him. Seeing the old lady looking at him with curiosity, Tony said casually, "They are my personal assistants and secretaries. Just find a place for them to rest. Don't worry about them. I've asked the cook to come." Tony took off his coat as soon as he entered and threw it behind him. Happy Hogan took it skillfully and hung it on the coat rack beside the door. From some small movements, Henry discovered that some of Tony Stark's quirks and the future gradually appeared in him. For example, although the people who came were all close confidants of him, the CEO of Stark Industries, only Happy was within his reach. The others stayed far away. I wonder if the legendary Pepper, Virginia Pepper Potts, was in there? At least Henry didn't see a blonde secretary who looked like Gwyneth Paltrow. "Ah, you're here too." Tony said this deliberately when he saw Henry. Although there was not much content, the sarcasm in his tone was about to overflow, turning into actual poison that covered Henry's face. Just when Henry was brewing words of counterattack, but couldn't be too hurtful, Tony decisively changed the subject. He looked at Charlize Theron with shining eyes. "I haven't seen you, beautiful girl." "Catherine, is this your great-granddaughter?" Henry came forward and introduced, "This is Charlize Theron, a new Hollywood actress, my girlfriend." Tony didn't care at all about Henry's attitude of being eager to declare his sovereignty. He just changed his expression to sympathy and said, "It's not easy to follow a man who speaks so badly. Don't you consider changing your boyfriend, Charlize?" At this time, Catherine jumped out. She waved her hand as if to drive away a puppy and said, "Go, go. Whether she's my great-granddaughter or not, I will keep them away from the men of the Stark family. Charlize, come with me. Let the men talk." Charlize Theron, who was pulled away by the arm, made a helpless and embarrassed expression. She did not forget to rush to say, "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Stark." Looking at the beauty going away, Tony raised his voice slightly and said, "Just Tony, don't call me Mr. Stark." Tony Stark looked reluctantly at the departing beauty, his expression immediately changing to one of disdain as he looked at the other man. I'd use Stark films to pick up girls? Who'd want to do that now?" Henry perfectly managed embarrassment, forward veins bulging, and a rather forced smile. "Mr. Stark, I haven't made up my mind about this matter yet." "Catherine called you here, you haven't made up your mind yet, and you called me," Henry said. "I also want to know if you have any thoughts on the questions I have raised. Movies don't always play out like this. The CIA sends the protagonist to do some dirty work, only to take care of them afterwards and destroy the evidence. You always have to be careful when you do things. I can't just blindly bang my head against a target you draw. Even if you're hiring an ordinary employee, besides generous compensation, you have to provide them with peace of mind. It's not like I'm desperate, with you as my last resort. In my opinion, there's no point in taking risks that outweigh the benefits." Seeing that everyone was still standing in front of the door and hadn't even entered the living room, Tony winked and said, "Let's find a place to talk." "Catherine," Henry shouted, "I'll borrow a place from you to talk about something. Let's go to the study." "You know where it is," Catherine replied loudly. "I know." Henry turned to Tony and said, "Come with me. It's the small hall next to the living room. The door can be closed." Happy, Tony called his trusted leader, and the other party immediately understood. Happy quickly instructed his men, some to inspect the house, some to confirm the personnel with the chef team, and the rest of the people who had nothing to do went to the small living room to rest. He closed the door of the study and stood guard outside. Seeing this, Charlize looked at the closed study with a worried look on her face. Catherine noticed her worry and comforted her. "Things between men can be solved by themselves. You don't have to worry about them." "Catherine, don't you want to know what they said?" Charlize asked a very innocent question. What do you think about the idea that men and women should be honest with each other? Isn't that right? Being honest with each other, not hiding anything from each other, isn't that the most basic requirement for relationships between men and women? But I think there should be a prerequisite, and that is that the other party only needs to tell you about things that are related to you or that may harm your own interests. If he tells you a secret that your role shouldn't know, would that be a good thing? This question stumped Charlize Theron. Catherine continued, in normal relationships, men and women can of course be honest with each other about everything, no matter how big or small. Because most people don't have such life-threatening secrets. But those people, the old lady nodded her chin towards the study, their secrets are not something that ordinary people can bear. Unless your energy today is at the same level as theirs and you can help them. Then your knowledge will be meaningful. Otherwise, you will have to worry about something you can't solve yourself, and even put yourself in danger. Chapter 313 Dangerous Secret. Seeing Charlize still looking confused, Catherine posed another question. Do you know who was the most attractive man of my time? Charlize was stunned by the sudden change of subject, but after careful consideration, she said, Chaplin, that was a hateful, philandering, and irresponsible fellow. He's far from it. Who then? JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the President of the United States. Catherine nodded and said, yes, the unfortunate man who was assassinated. He was a very charming and humorous man. His family had unimaginable wealth, and he himself had immense power. You can't imagine how many female celebrities were obsessed with him in that era. If you had spoken to him face to face, you wouldn't have disliked him, you would have been captivated by him. Even I find it hard to resist his charm. But I know how dangerous John Jr. is, and I've tried to persuade my friends who have fallen into melancholy. Some listened, some didn't. And, Catherine shook her head regretfully. Charlize Theron inexplicably thought of a name and blurted out, Marilyn Monroe. That was a naive and somewhat silly sister. She should have entered Hollywood, Catherine said regretfully. Wasn't Monroe ordered by Kennedy? Catherine shook her head and said, there is such a statement among the many conspiracy theories. But John would not lay his hands on a woman. Jacqueline disdains to do so. It is because he is so reassuring that some people dare to entrust themselves to him. It's just that everyone overestimated John's ability. He can't even protect himself, how can he protect others? I am more inclined to believe that Marilyn knew too much and could no longer extricate herself. Others wanted to give John a warning, and then chose such a person who is important enough but irrelevant to the overall situation. John is a gentleman, but it does not mean that his opponents are all gentlemen. Seeing Charlize Theron's worried expression, Catherine couldn't help but smile. Okay, it seems I gave you an extreme example and scared you. I just wanted to tell you that sometimes, letting a man keep secrets isn't necessarily a bad thing. What if he takes advantage of our feigned confusion to betray us? That's another level of question. But isn't that life? There are no right answers, only choices, and consequences. But these consequences may not be what you like. Charlize Theron is no Katharine Hepburn, after all. She is only 19 years old now. Although her experiences have lifted her out of her innocence, compared to the experience of an 87-year-old grandmother, the two are not on the same level. Many things are not easy for her to accept or understand. Catherine didn't need to ask the girl's troubled expression to know what she was worried about. Are you thinking about Henry? Charlize was speechless, just nodded. That child has secrets too, I'm sure you've noticed. The girl nodded again. As someone who sleeps by her side, how could she not know everything? Did she really think she was such a naivete? Catherine offered her own assessment. But that child is even more afraid of death than I am. I think you, staying with him, won't have to worry too much about that. Who would keep a tiger? And even treat it like a cat? The future South African diamond screamed inwardly. Often, it takes a push before he takes a step forward. But you don't have to push him too hard. Today, his willingness to help you should naturally spur him on. Just focus on your own affairs. Don't worry about him falling behind. If the child doesn't starve to death without someone to look after him, I don't think he'll leave the house. This was because Henry wasn't distracted by what the two women were saying about him. Otherwise, he would have been surprised by Catherine's ability to see through his nerdy nature. Now, he was alone with one of the universe's rare geniuses. Despite repeated use of his X-ray vision, he couldn't see if there was a gem in the man's head, and Henry didn't dare to let his guard down. Conversations with Tony weren't the kind of highbrow, irrelevant talk. But this man, as the Buddhists say, suffered from a heavy burden of karma. This applies to all superheroes and supervillains, regardless of their origins. Just the mere contact with such a person filled Henry with trepidation. This was why he'd always been so blunt, and more or less wanted to distance himself from this young master. Now that he'd decided to collaborate, he couldn't afford to shoulder all the potential consequences. It would be ideal to simply reap the benefits without incurring any consequences. But even a cursory glance revealed that such a scenario wasn't possible. So Henry had to listen carefully considering the implications of each of Tony Stark's requests. After entering the study and taking a seat, Tony said nothing. He locked eyes with Henry, as if competing to see who could hold their breath longer. A moment later, there was a knock on the closed door. Henry simply glanced over. Tony then said, "Come in." It was one of Tony Stark's attendants. A strikingly attractive secretary, not only dressed in a business suit that flaunted her curves, but also in certain areas, her figure bulged to the point of bursting. The secretary, holding a silver tray containing a bottle of premium whiskey and 2 empty glasses, placed them before Tony Stark. She didn't touch the bottle or glasses at all, then left. Henry was perplexed by the secretary's voluptuous glances and glares, as if this young master were an old monk with no regard for women. Could it be that this Tony Stark had, for some unknown reason, become gay, preferring chrysanthemums to women? This speculation made Henry's hips tighten, a sense of crisis rising. Perhaps it was time to consider ending the Iron Man legend before it even began. "I have a feeling you're thinking something rude with that expression on your face. Maybe I should go out and get a gun and shoot you a few times when I'm upset. Speaking of which, bullets can't penetrate your skin, so does it hurt? The question of whether it hurts or not is a bit mysterious. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Which answer do you want? Forget it, don't tell me. I'm not interested. Anyway, I can save the money on bullets." "That's what you mean, isn't it?" Henry shrugged, not wanting to continue the topic. Tony really wasn't interested, otherwise he wouldn't have pressed the issue. Chapter 314, Disguise in the Jungle. To change the subject, and also out of his own curiosity, Henry asked, "I thought Playboy Tony Stark would surround himself with a bunch of beautiful secretaries just to keep resources close at hand. But now it seems like they all have these complaining expressions. Don't they get some regular watering?" Tony wore the same rueful expression. "When you're dealing with endless little tricks, every time you see someone, you just want to mow them down with your M61 Vulcan cannon. You don't have the energy to beat a woman. Besides, I hired them to handle things, not just women. I put them in those positions because I value their ability. Ordinary women aren't worth the money." Thinking back to the newspapers in recent years, there are indeed very few contents related to Tony Stark. He is not the Playboy image that often appears in the entertainment pages, and the heroine of scandals changes every day. But he is not a touted young and promising entrepreneur. Even the news about controversy or being compared with old Stark has never been seen. It is as if the news related to him is deliberately downplayed. "Have you ever thought about a question?" Henry suddenly brought up a topic. Tony, who was drinking whiskey, pretended to be nonchalant, took out the jammer again, and turned on the switch. "Tell me, people without weaknesses are not trustworthy. Because people can't figure out what you are going to do or what you want to do, you have what you are experiencing today. Well, go on." Henry poured himself a glass of wine to moisten his throat. "I have to state first that I don't know what your current situation is, nor do I know what other people think. I'm just talking about my point of view, so just listen to it. Just like soldiers wearing white gear in the snow, brown desert camouflage in the desert, and dark green camouflage in the jungle. Is it because you're so conspicuous that you're getting into so much trouble? Are you trying to convince me to go along with them? If you can't distance yourself from that circle, you need some sort of disguise once you're inside it. Otherwise, everyone will worry you're out to cause trouble. Do you know the Eastern culture term a pledge of allegiance? What's that?" Henry explained briefly, using The Water Margin, one of the 4 great classical novels. "In short, if you want to enter a certain circle, whether through a pledge of allegiance or some kind of ritual, the main purpose is to show those in the circle that you're in it together, and you have to demonstrate a shared destiny. That way, people won't worry you're joining the circle to break the rules, or even to expose someone inside and expose them publicly. The deeper the collusion, the more likely it is that the actions you're going to commit will be more disgusting. Of course, this doesn't mean you should go along with them. Rather, it's about picking things you can accept and creating weaknesses in the eyes of outsiders, so they can use this to buy you off or eliminate you. Another benefit of this approach is that it lets the enemy know to target your weaknesses, rather than probing you from all sides. That way, you'll know which points you need to defend most. Instead of being clueless and suspecting everything they see is out to harm you, his fingers tapped lightly on the table. Tony suddenly asked, "Is this also your attitude? I usually choose to stay out of the circle. I can't see them, they can't see me. And everyone's happy. Partly because I have no need for that circle, there's no need to go to all that trouble. Just stay away." Tony tilted his head and suddenly asked, "Have you ever trusted anyone? If trust were so easy to give, I'd have become a guinea pig for the US military long ago. You're not going to tell me the US military is benevolent and won't use special individuals for experiments, are you?" Tony paused. Judging from the information he had, he couldn't bring himself to say that, unless he was lying. But today you have a need. The hidden line was a new weakness, bringing the conversation back to its original point. Tony looked at the man before him. Henry conceded generously. "Yes. But I'd have to see if the benefits outweigh the costs. After all, it's not a necessity, I absolutely must have it." Tony didn't continue to dwell on himself, but instead revisited the old situation and offered a new offer. "To become CEO of Stark Films, I don't need you to proactively investigate anything. At that level, you'll naturally see and hear things. You just need to be my eyes and ears, and help me take notes. I'll do the intelligence analysis myself. After all, if that incident wasn't an accident, I don't think it was a large-scale conspiracy. Actively seeking information would only attract unnecessary attention, and it might not lead to the right direction, and could even lead to misleading. Other remuneration conditions remain unchanged. The contract period is tentatively set at 3 or 5 years, with the option of extension. You can leave at any time, without penalty or non-compete clauses. Similarly, if I no longer feel you're needed, I can always ask you to leave." Henry nodded. "Well, that makes sense. I'm open to it." More than any compensation guarantees, Tony accurately grasped Henry's true need, the right to escape at any moment. Perhaps granting a soldier the right to desert in the face of battle seemed strange, but if one were to imagine him as a spy deep within the enemy camp, then the power to make decisive decisions was crucial to survival. The so-called Man of Steel wasn't, in the eyes of these people, an infallible ability. It was simply that no one was fully engaged in research right now. Without this consensus, the name Henry Brown wouldn't appear on so many lists. Tony was surprised by Henry's easy approval. "You just agreed. I have another question. Was this a deliberate trap set for you? Do you understand that?" "Probably not. You sound uncertain. Otherwise, you wouldn't have used probably," Tony replied. "The person who told me this is a trusted friend of our family. But I can't place the same trust in the organization behind them. After all, I only learned about that organization after the old man died." Actually, he probably shouldn't have asked, but Henry couldn't resist asking, "That organization, do you know its name?" "I didn't ask for details, and they didn't tell me. I guess the old man has been a member since World War II. Although they did ask me to replace him, I refused." Henry looked at the young master curiously. Tony wasn't thick-skinned enough to hide such a scorching gaze, so he explained, "They were my comrades in arms. To me, they're just a bunch of old uncles and aunts, and I might not even know them all. Once you're in, you'll be treated like grandchildren everywhere. Would you like that?" "Okay. That's the second generation not understanding the hardships of the first generation. They've paved the way for you, and you're still not happy? Do you really have to carry you through in a sit-up chair? Never mind. People born with a silver spoon in their mouths tend to disdain silver and iron spoons. Isn't that normal? Blame your own poverty for cherishing even an iron spoon." Chapter 315 Whereabouts finally revealed. FBI's Los Angeles office, Special Agent Jack McCann approached his partner, Maris Horvath, with newly acquired intelligence. The information concerned a key figure in the disappearance of California State Representative Mike Liddell Horton. They had long sought to interview him, but were unable to locate him. Insufficient evidence prevented them from issuing arrest warrants or search warrants, stalling the case to this day. Now, they finally had an opportunity, but the circumstances weren't right. So, they turned to the head of the Los Angeles office, Assistant Director in Charge, Owen Davis. The two men arrived at the boss's office and knocked on the door. A voice immediately rang out from within. "Come in," the two men said, opening the door and getting straight to the point. "Boss, the key figure in our case has appeared. We're just having a small problem and need your assistance." "What case? Who?" The disappearance of State Representative Horton, Henry Brown, whom we've been unable to locate. Hearing that this was the case, which was about to turn 2 years old, Owen felt a wave of anxiety. He knew this wasn't a disappearance, it was a complete annihilation. His family, his entourage, and his closest associates had all been wiped out. The Continental Hotel was responsible. But their backing was so strong, they dared to ignore the FBI's demands and refused to hand over the killer. Besides, they were just a platform. What good would it do if they were shut down? Wouldn't it be difficult to start anew? This wasn't asking the Continental Hotel to cut off its ties to survive. With a scapegoat, everyone could save face and the matter could be mitigated. The most likely scenario was that the Continental Hotel would throw out a name and let the FBI investigate. However, whether this name actually existed, whether it was still in the US, and whether it was the actual shooter, all of these were difficult to verify. As for the employer, no one dared to ask. It wasn't because they were afraid the Continental Hotel wouldn't disclose the information, but because they feared they would mention a name they couldn't afford to offend either. This case clearly involved political opponents displeased with the actions of the fat black congressman, so they took action. But they did it so cleanly. Without a body, there was no case to build. The forensic team couldn't even find bloodstains, leaving them with no clear direction for the investigation. If it were an ordinary person, they would have been declared a missing persons. After a few fake investigations, the files were tucked away in boxes and tossed into cold case storage. After 20 years, if the person didn't show up, the record would be changed to death, and the matter would be closed. Unfortunately, Mike Liddell Horton was a California state legislator and a well-known public figure. His disappearance couldn't remain unsolved, it needed to be thoroughly investigated, dead or alive. The LAPD readily passed on this hot potato. This put the FBI in a difficult position, caught in the middle. Jack McCann and Maris Horvath, who took the case, confidently claimed that the disappearance could be traced to a single figure, Henry Brown, a bulletproof mutant. But with mere suspicions, without direct or indirect evidence, the detectives couldn't obtain an arrest warrant, a search warrant, or even a subpoena from a magistrate. And that wasn't even considering the sufficiency of the evidence. So they had to find a way to get the witness to confess, to turn the witness into a criminal, so the case could proceed. But therein lay the problem. Henry Brown had no job, no fixed location. Although he did have a place to live, they couldn't find him. Without court permission, they couldn't even enter the premises. Furthermore, without even being able to meet him, they couldn't use his refusal to cooperate as a serious suspect in the case and request a subpoena or arrest warrant. If it weren't for the frequent sightings, they would have suspected he had left Los Angeles in California. But that information wouldn't have helped the FBI apprehend him. Every time they arrived at the sighting, he'd already vanished. Until today, they finally had information on his whereabouts. Assistant Director Owen, who should have breathed a sigh of relief, was overcome by the moment he saw the location. It was the inauguration party for the new CEO of Stark Films, and that new CEO was none other than the Henry Brown they'd been eyeing. Catching an ordinary citizen was a completely different matter from arresting someone of high social status. Not to mention, Owen smelled something fishy about this case. If Henry Brown truly was a problem, he'd absolutely support imprisoning the mutant, perhaps even subjecting him to military experimentation. But knowing the Continental Hotel was the culprit, why was Henry Brown so central to the case? He had a background in Alaskan crabbing and a brief stint in Hollywood as a minor actor. His most notable job was as Audrey Hepburn's assistant, assisting with UNICEF visits. Such a person had no connection to the Continental Hotel, and even to Congressman Mike Liddell Horton. Well, the congressman likely knew he was in trouble and needed a mutant to protect him. Consequently, the congressman's entire family became missing, while Henry Brown remained active. Owen's intuition, based on his years of investigating cases, was that Henry Brown was definitely involved in the congressman's disappearance. But what role did he play? Why were Jack McCann and Maris Horvath so determined to pick on him? These were the parts Owen couldn't comprehend. There were parts of the situation that were unclear, and jumping to conclusions was dangerous. So, Owen threw the intelligence documents back on the table and asked, "What do you want me to do, boss? If you can get us inside the banquet venue and ask Henry Brown to cooperate with the investigation, there's no reason for him to refuse. As long as we can bring him back, half the problem is solved." Hearing this, Owen didn't want to listen any further. What was coming next was definitely illegal. If he listened to even one more word, he'd be dragged into this mess by these two. Stop, halting his two subordinates, Owen looked them in the eye. Have you ever considered whose company this is, boss? This is just Stark Films. It's not one of Hollywood's big eight, not even a second-tier studio. What are you worried about? A film company of this caliber would go bankrupt and then reopen, and it wouldn't even make the news. Am I worried about Stark Films? I'm worried about Stark Industries. People in the market now have doubts about whether a company with a Stark name is truly Stark. After all, Obadiah Stane's outrageous actions a few years ago had made many speculators take advantage. But how could the FBI not know who owned Stark Films? The state representative's case, however, needed a resolution. After weighing the pros and cons, Assistant Director Irving, the head of the FBI's Los Angeles office, said, "I can take you there. But have you considered the risks of taking someone away in this situation? Don't worry, boss, it's foolproof. If anything goes wrong, we'll cover it." With the unsolved case of Congressman Mike Liddell Horton, even if there are reporters present, they'll just strip the suspect naked. We can't lose. Despite his subordinates' confident words, Irving felt a growing sense of trepidation. Chapter 316 New CEO Inauguration Banquet. Stark Films has a new CEO. This news should have been unremarkable, causing no public outcry. However, the reality is that Hollywood is not as calm as it appears. Founded by Howard Stark, it was one of the 8 major film companies during the early years of Hollywood's golden age. In terms of both history and credentials, Stark Films is considered a top-tier Hollywood studio. Its film copyright library includes many classics that will go down in history, such as King Kong and Citizen Kane. Even after World War II, when Stark Films scaled back its production efforts, barely releasing a single low-budget independent film a year, it remained Hollywood's most important equipment manufacturer and supplier. From cameras and editing machines to projectors, lighting fixtures, and large camera cranes, it manufactured every piece of equipment related to film production and projection. It can be said that Stark Films still holds a significant position in Hollywood. Since its decline, Stark Films has lacked a qualified leader. Whether it was Tony Stark Sr. or Tony Stark Jr., the focus and attention of the figurehead CEO was elsewhere. Now, such a company was about to welcome a new CEO. Those who had received advance notice were all investigating who Henry Brown was and how he had garnered Tony Stark's favor. Indeed, everyone was simply curious about who had been favored, and no one considered his qualifications. Who in the industry was capable of running a film company, including top producers, was a rare few, and their movements were a matter of great concern. And Henry Brown was clearly not among them. When Henry Brown's credentials were revealed, many top executives were stunned. What did it mean to be just a passing actor in Hollywood? His only real accomplishment was probably being the young assistant to Oscar-winning actress Audrey Hepburn. After learning that Tony Stark was unsure whether he would attend the banquet, many top executives felt it was pointless. The polite ones would send an assistant or secretary, the unceremonious ones would simply ignore him. Henry wasn't surprised by this outcome. At Tony's insistence, the inauguration party was primarily aimed at the various factions within Stark Films. These people had been acting on their own for too long, and now a new boss suddenly appeared from above. If he arrived without a trace, there would be no hope of controlling anyone. Of course, they could resort to drastic measures, firing a certain executive as a warning to others. However, considering the severance pay for the dismissed executive, compared to the cost of a banquet would be cheaper. So, holding an inauguration party was the better option. Furthermore, if everyone remained obedient and simply refused to cooperate, firing people without a good excuse could easily lead to even greater problems. Since taking over, Tony has consistently treated his employees with kindness. Even when adjusting positions, he offered salary increases as an inducement. If this image were to be swayed, all previous efforts would be wasted. This party also served as a crucial reminder to those with ulterior motives: there's a new fish in Hollywood's pond. If anything disgusting or filthy happens, don't forget him. Even if Henry wanted to keep things simple, Tony, who was paying for the party out of his own pocket, could a clerk like him refuse? He'd be hired and resigned on the same day, a Hollywood joke. However, even more eye-catching than Henry Brown at the party were a pair of veteran and new actors who weren't mother and daughter, but who were more like mother and daughter. Charlize Theron and Katharine Hepburn. The reclusive Hollywood queen, who had been a recluse since 1993, had made a return appearance in Los Angeles without much fanfare. But given her stature, her attendance at such an event was hard not to speculate. Furthermore, Hepburn chatted cordially with the new CEO of Stark Pictures, and was even more familiar with her female companion, raising questions about their relationship. After all, Katharine Hepburn was once considered the de facto mistress of Stark Pictures. Even though her colleagues of her generation had long since retired or were buried deep in the shadows, new employees still recognized the connection. There was no other way. When Stark was still around, whenever Hepburn came to Los Angeles, he'd simply direct the Stark film staff to do whatever she wanted. Hepburn could even direct the Stark film staff to do even the most trivial things, simply by showing up. Of course, serious matters still had to go through the motions, but Stark probably wouldn't refuse. So, for Hepburn, today's party felt like home ground. However, she wasn't there solely to support Henry. She was there to arrange a meeting for Charlize with a powerful agent, to introduce them. To impress the agent, whom she had never met, Charlize specifically sought advice on how to behave appropriately and present herself at such events. Perhaps it was the perfect match between the South African diamonds and the Hollywood Queen's aura. Charlize mastered Katharine's guidance in record time. The only flaw was perhaps the excess collagen in her face, a hint of baby fat. Even though Charlize had never experienced such a situation before, she was still incredibly nervous. She managed to react calmly and appropriately, without falling into the frivolous attitude of a partygoer. She wore a narrow blue plaid skirt and a hunting jacket, a true Katharine Hepburn look. To many, it was like Katharine Hepburn from the Golden Age, leaping from black and white cinema into the technicolor world of reality. So much so that the entertainment reporters at the scene devoted most of their film to the new and old actresses. Even though most didn't recognize the younger one, they only knew she was the companion of the new CEO of Stark Pictures. Some even speculated that it might be one of Katharine Hepburn's great nieces, poised to reign supreme in Hollywood under the care of her great-aunt. Oh my God. Is this the golden age of Hollywood coming back? An older, middle-aged woman wearing black-framed glasses approached Charlize Theron and exclaimed in admiration. Katharine happily embraced the woman. "Jane, you're here. I was worried that you wouldn't come. How is that possible? You told me that you would introduce me to a diamond in the rough. Even if there is no chance, I will overcome all difficulties to broaden my horizons. Could this one be your great niece? None of my brother's children are interested in Hollywood. This is Charlize Theron, a child I am very optimistic about." After the introduction, Katharine introduced the other side. "Charlize, this is J.J. Harris, Jane Joseph Harris. A great agent and producer, and of course, an outstanding woman." Charlize Theron smiled and extended her hand and greeted, "Ms. Harris, it's an honor to meet you. Call me J.J. Harris. Or just call me Jen like Katharine. I'm honored to meet you too. Please just call me Charlize, Jen." Chapter 317 The Uninvited Agent. The two greeted each other happily and shook hands. J.J. Harris suddenly approached and asked, "You told me secretly that you are actually Katharine's secret granddaughter. The one that has never been exposed?" Katharine said from the side. "Wrong answer. Tell me, whose child do you want me to give birth to?" "I don't know. But no matter who you have had an affair with, the child between you will be very cute." Just like Charlize. Hearing this, Katharine looked at Charlize suspiciously. Suddenly, she chuckled. "Honestly, if I weren't the person involved, I would know that it's not true. I think it seems nice to have a child like you." Charlize, whose defense was suddenly broken, could no longer maintain the Queen's cold attitude. Instead, she said coquettishly with a helpless expression, "Katharine." This different look made J.J. Harris's eyes shine. "Katharine, that's not an expression you would have. What if I say that this child is just acting the way she imitated me today? What do you think? Is she a promising talent? What? Isn't it that Charlize's temperament is very similar to yours?" So, Katharine took Charlize Theron's hand, shook her head and said, "No. She is different from me in her usual appearance. Her performance today is the result of her deliberately trained acting skills." "Oh, God. To be honest, if you hadn't been standing right here, I would have thought you drank some magic potion that would restore your youth and return to your 20s. Holding Charlize Theron's hand, J.J. Harris looked around and touched things here and there. Charlize felt embarrassed, and her temperament, which had been held tight, couldn't help but break through. J.J. Harris asked with satisfaction, "Charlize, what school did you come from? Or which acting school did you train in?" You are very good at controlling your facial expressions. I spent some time at the Joffrey Ballet School in New York. Then I took courses at Mr. Salvador's acting school for more than a month. The rest of the time, I practiced at home with my boyfriend Henry. Practice at home? How do you practice? J.J. Harris asked curiously. Every day I'd watch a movie that had won an acting award or been nominated, and then I'd try to imitate my performance while he filmed it. We'd then discuss how my performance differed from the original film and how we could improve it. Your boyfriend, J.J. Harris asked again. That Henry Brown? Yes, that Henry Brown? Yeah. J.J. Harris looked at the unremarkable man with a complicated expression and said, I thought that guy was a classmate or friend of Tony Stark's, just working for him to pick up girls. Catherine said, that kid is talented, too, but he's just not that interested in acting. The good thing is that he's capable in other areas, not necessarily acting. Has he been in any movies? J.J. Harris continued. She was already thinking of signing this girl, but she still wanted to see more of her performance before she knew what direction to push her in. When asked about this, Charlize said, somewhat sheepishly, they're just background characters in small productions, with no lines. Ah, what a shame. You deserve more. Just as the two were about to discuss deeper issues, an untimely commotion disrupted their progress. Standing before Henry were three white men in sharp suits, one old and two young. The two younger ones produced their IDs and shouted, FBI. Henry Brown. We suspect you're involved in the disappearance of State Representative Mike Liddell Horton. Please come with us back to the Bureau to cooperate with the investigation, they shouted, as if afraid no one would hear them. And sure enough, the reporters' flashbulbs, long silent, lit up again, fearing they'd miss their chance if they were too slow to click. Henry smiled and asked, do you have an arrest warrant, sir? No, I'm just asking for your cooperation in the investigation. Does it have to be today? We'd prefer it elsewhere, but you know how long we've been looking for you. If you refuse, it would constitute obstruction of justice, and we can arrest you. I have the right to an attorney, right? Notify him to come to the station and accompany you for questioning. The two FBI agents didn't dare to publicly block the issue of an attorney. But they still used a delaying tactic, not intending to wait for an attorney to arrive. They also wanted to advance and arrest a man. Charlize Theron, seeing this, anxiously rushed to Henry's side to defend his rights, even though she didn't understand what was going on. But Catherine grabbed Charlize, preventing her from rushing forward. Although Henry didn't look at them, he secretly made a gesture to stop her. Regardless of whether he was seen or not, he continued to ask, two sirs, this is not the first time we meet. One of them said quickly, this is the first time we meet. In order to investigate the whereabouts of Congressman Horton, we finally found the person who is suspected of being closely related, that is, you. If we have met before, the matter would have been clarified long ago, and it would not have been dragged on to this occasion. Don't you think so? Henry did not answer, but just put his hand into the pocket of his suit jacket. Such an action naturally aroused the vigilance of the two FBI agents. They quickly drew their guns, pointed at Henry and shouted, what are you doing? Take your hands out and put them where we can see them. Don't move. Henry was too lazy to complain about the contradiction between asking people to take it out and asking them not to move. He just pressed the play button in his pocket, and suddenly a voice from the cheap speaker attracted the people around him. FBI, Mr. Henry Brown, right? Please cooperate with our investigation. Can I ask, what is it? Or do you have an arrest warrant? Arrest warrant? Have you done anything that requires us to arrest you? Don't worry, kid. You just have to come with us. There won't be any problem. What if I refuse? Then you'll be in trouble. Then there was the clear sound of closing the car door and starting the engine. During this time, Henry's voice kept asking questions from the cheap speaker. It was nothing more than his own rights, asking about the destination, asking about motives, but all received silent responses. At this time, Henry, who was pointed at by a gun, had his free hand raised high. The other hand in his pocket slowly took out a small Sony Walkman from it. It was the one that was playing the tape and making the sound. He raised both hands above his head, only one of them holding the Walkman. Henry smiled and said, I think this is not the first time we meet, two FBI officers. Quotation mark. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 318, a recording that shouldn't exist. The fast-talking FBI special agent was stunned and asked, "When was this?" "Oh, you're asking when was this recording made? That was the day you two illegally escorted me to the home of State Representative Mike Liddell Horton. If you continue listening, you can hear the conversation between me and the congressman's bodyguard, confirming his identity and location. This is different from what you two said back then about cooperating with the investigation. Shouldn't it just be going to your FBI bureau for questioning? So I'm curious, is this cooperating with the investigation scenario the same? Once I go with you, I'll end up in an unknown location, and then something unspeakable will happen again. What nonsense are you talking about?" The agent's tone was timid, clearly indicating something was wrong. The entertainment reporters' flashbulbs flashed again, this time all playing political reporters. The people they were photographing were the two FBI special agents. Some of the rookies had foolishly used up their film earlier, and now they were hurriedly changing it. Of course, some experienced reporters had also used up their film. But then they expertly pulled out a second camera and snapped away again. Henry, however, didn't intend to stop. He lowered his hands and continued, "The two officers said they were investigating Councilman Horton's case, but I know nothing. I left as soon as I arrived. On the contrary, whose orders did you take me to Councilman Horton's house? And why did you bring me there? Why, knowing all this, did you ask me about Councilman Horton again? Don't you all know more about these things than I?" Who's still baffled. "So why are you insisting on my cooperation, asking me about this?" Henry was hinting that the FBI was trying to frame him. The reporters present were all shrewd. Even without these hints, they knew what the most sensational headline would be and from what angle to approach this matter. Another FBI special agent reacted quickly, shouting, "You're obstructing justice. That garbled recording of yours can't serve as evidence at all." The speaker never identified himself. "You're just insinuating and slandering us. With all the advancements in scientific forensics these days, a simple matter like this, a voice print comparison can confirm the two officers are speaking. Are you sure you're not guilty of your own guilt by denying it so hastily? Okay, give me the tape. I'll have the FBI lab perform the forensic analysis." Faced with the agent holding a gun in one hand and demanding the evidence with the other, Henry didn't hand over his Walkman. Instead, he said, "Is it FBI protocol for a client to demand evidence at gunpoint? Maybe it's just West Coast protocol, but it's really eye-opening. Shouldn't I talk to my friends in Washington, D.C., and tell them about this absurdity here on the West Coast?" The person who spoke these words was Tony Stark, who had emerged from the crowd. His appearance once again murdered the film in the reporters' cameras. But the flashes were sparse. Because more people were in a hurry to change the film, this made the young master feel a little unhappy. As soon as this person appeared, Owen Davis would not let his subordinates continue to hold their guns. If the gun accidentally went off, whether it hit this person or not, the consequences would be serious. Tony Stark's current backers are a group of American military gangsters. Who in the political arena dares to confront such a group of people? Are they not afraid of being tied to a missile and fired at some strange place? And he has to find a way to resolve the farce just now. The recording in the other party's hand is indeed an unexpected trouble. If he had known about this thing earlier, he would never agree to take the other party away in such a public place, especially with reporters present. Mr. Stark, I am Owen Davis, the assistant director in charge of the FBI Los Angeles office. As he said, he extended a friendly hand to this young man who was much younger than him. Tony didn't shake it. He simply glanced at the other person, then leaned slightly closer to ask, "Who's more senior, the assistant director or the director?" The shrewd-looking white elite beside him smiled wryly and said, "The assistant director is actually the head of the FBI's Los Angeles office." He dodged the question of who was more senior than the director. After getting his answer, Tony didn't even glance at the outstretched hand. He walked directly towards Henry and said, "You can give your tape evidence to your lawyers. They'll take care of it." A middle-aged white man with a briefcase and glasses, looking capable and shrewd, stepped forward. He greeted, "Hello, Mr. Brown. I'm Gus Chandel, the attorney for Stark Group. You can give me the tape. I guarantee that all forensic investigations will be conducted impartially. No innocent people will be wrongly accused." Henry not only handed over the tape, but also the entire Walkman to the lawyer. Tony came over at this time, looked at the Walkman with a strange expression, and said, "How can you have such a recording?" When faced with a doubtful conversation, Preserving some evidence is the only way to protect yourself. I have never dealt with federal officials, and they don't make their intentions clear. In the absence of knowing anything, I can only choose to protect myself. Tony didn't even bother to ask where the guy had hidden the recording equipment. Seeing the long unseen big boss at Stark Films, the veterans in the film industry rushed forward to greet him. Even if he wasn't as good as that young man Henry Brown, he could please the boss, but if he got on his nerves, he would definitely make things difficult for him. The other representatives from the various film companies sent to the inauguration banquet hurried to contact their respective bosses. Don't underestimate the power of the Big 8 Hollywood studios or other film companies. They are not on the same level as Stark Industries. Tony Stark showed up, and they didn't even come to make themselves known. But the most anxious person was Owen Davis, the head of the FBI's Los Angeles office. If this matter wasn't properly resolved today, it would implicate him. He was there, and he couldn't escape even if he wanted to. If it weren't for the pressure of solving the case, who would be willing to make this trip? But he had to take the risk. After all, as long as he had the person, a gunshot wound to the back could be ruled a suicide. But this time, it really was a disaster. He said hastily, "Mr. Stark, I think there must be some misunderstanding here. You're coming to my territory to arrest my appointed CEO." "What's the misunderstanding?" Tony Stark didn't turn around, just tilted his head and questioned the FBI regional boss. His words were clearly protective. Chapter 319, A Dirty Deal to Resolve Misunderstandings. Owen Davis was quick to smooth things over. "Mr. Stark, my agent was misled by a false tip and contacted Mr. Brown. Actually, misunderstandings like this can be resolved if Mr. Brown explains them later in our investigation. If Mr. Brown can't come, we can just chat aside and clear things up." "Oh," Tony Stark turned and returned to the FBI regional commander. "Speaking of which, I have a tip. I heard something concerning is happening near the border of Alaska and the Yukon, near the Arctic Ocean." "What's that concern?" "I don't know, that's why I asked you to investigate. We have to get a reassuring result, right? Otherwise, I'd be too scared to come to the West Coast. I have a villa in Malibu, don't worry, Mr. Stark. I'll send 2 of our best agents to relay your concerns." Tony patted the arm of the FBI regional boss who was much older than him and said, "With such an outstanding federal official like you see, my confidence in the security on the West Coast has increased a lot. Come on, let's toast to my newly appointed CEO. He will be in Hollywood, your territory. I don't want him to cause any scandal and affect the stock price of Stark Industries. You have to help me keep an eye on him. This is our responsibility, and there is no need for Mr. Stark to remind us." "Yeah." Tony turned around and ordered, "Happy, buy negatives from the reporters. Don't let any reports that damage the image of Stark Pictures appear." "Okay, boss." Of course, Happy would not do this kind of thing himself. He nodded to the public relations team brought by Tony Stark, and asked them to deal with the entertainment reporters present. Things like this have a certain price, and it is not an exclusive report. The reporters obediently took out the negatives from the camera and handed them over. As for the photos of today's inauguration banquet, they were naturally provided by Stark's public relations team. Everyone just had to follow the established template and release the news. Only when both sides were at loggerheads, ignoring their minions, would these stories be newsworthy. Now that both sides had reached an agreement, was there any need to fan the flames? Furthermore, Stark Industries and the FBI were collaborating, and the sheer size of both parties was far too much for entertainment reporters like them to handle. If anyone tried to capitalize on this kind of news and refused to hand over the film and cooperate, guess what would happen? It wouldn't even involve killing anyone or even Stark Industries intervening. The FBI's underhanded tactics were enough to drive these reporters crazy. So, they settled the matter with a payout, and everyone was happy. The only unhappy individuals were FBI Special Agents Jack McCann and Maris Horvath. It was obvious who the excellent agents assigned to the border between Alaska and the Yukon would be. It would definitely be them. In the back-and-forth exchange between Tony Stark and Owen Davis, they were barely able to get a word in. They were simply abandoned. They certainly weren't happy with this. But so what? The recordings in Henry Brown's possession were enough to implicate both of them. If they were implicated in the unsolved case of State Senator Mike Liddell Horton, triggering the Continental Hotel's cleanup process, 2 more missing agents' files would be dumped into the cold case vault. Just like Special Agent James, who had mysteriously disappeared over a year earlier. Assigned to sinecure, he suddenly became absent from work without cause one day. The FBI, of course, launched an investigation and discovered someone had erased all traces of Agent James's activities. Further investigation revealed that the perpetrator was Agent James himself. Whether he had vanished due to unsolvable problems, or whether this was the work of a third party, this was not the fate Jack McCann and Maris Horvath had intended. Watching the triumphant group raise their glasses and toast as if they had won a victory, Maris Horvath, furious, reached into his arms and grasped the special mutant-suppressing collar they had brought. Actually, when he and Jack saw the target reaching into his pocket, they had indeed been careless in drawing their guns. They hadn't momentarily considered that the target was a bulletproof mutant. However, with no stairs to retreat, they could only hold their guns high and try to intimidate him with words. But that had failed. But now, if they could just put the ability-suppressing collar on the target, stripping him of his bulletproof ability, wouldn't it be much easier to control him? However, Maris's little move was noticed by his companions. Jack quickly restrained Maris's hand and shook his head. Why, as long as we can control him, Jack lowered his voice, not in a place like this. Even if you don't care about those reporters, how many of Stark's bodyguards armed, would they let us go, right under their noses, against someone so close to their boss? Regardless of whether that person is Tony Stark or not, are we just going to let it go like this? If you dare to rush over, you will be beaten to pulp on the spot. You won't even have the chance to cover the national flag or be on the wall of honor. That guy is no longer someone we can deal with some small tricks. To bring him down, we must have solid evidence. Do you think we will have a chance to come back after being sent to Alaska? Jack and McCann pulled the people away and left the banquet venue, saying, our future in the FBI has come to an end. Irving can't save us. But he can't forbid us from resigning. This is not going to jail. We'll hang out in Alaska for a couple of days, then tender our resignations. By obeying his orders, we'll save his face. Even if Tony Stark asks about it later, we'll have an explanation. What about after you resign? We can go to the local police, the CIA, or a private security company. There are plenty of ways we can support our families. But if you charge in now and start a scene, you'll lose everything. You'll be lucky if you don't get killed on the spot. Jack McCann was much more sober than Maris Horvath. He simply hadn't anticipated that the weak mutants who had followed them obediently after a few warnings would cause him so much trouble. But things weren't at the point of flipping the table yet. They couldn't cut off their own escape routes because of a momentary impulse. Maris Horvath, who followed them out, looked at the core group with resentment. So what about that guy? Are we just going to let him go? Let's use our connections and have someone keep an eye on him. I don't know how he won Tony Stark's favor, but that circle is not easy to get into. He will make a mistake sooner or later. Then we can bring him down openly and no one will find fault. This sounds like the best way, but it makes people very angry. Maris Horvath came to the car and kicked the door angrily. Fuck, Jack McCann cursed as well. But his meaning was completely different. He looked at the dent on the door and cursed. This is not a government car, this is my own fucking car. Why are you kicking the door, you idiot? Chapter 322 People hurting each other. Tony Stark, who had just arrived at the banquet, not only watched a wonderful show but also participated in it. This made him feel very happy. Inexplicably, he suddenly understood why the old man was so obsessed with Stark films. The feeling of being the center of attention was truly intoxicating. The Stark family's flamboyant personality was like it was etched in their DNA. However, Tony Stark was not at all keen on social activities. The so-called toasts were just a casual way for him to drink. Listening to a few Stark Films veterans express their loyalty was just a matter of recognizing faces, as if he had never met them before. However, these people's faces were completely unremarkable, and you would probably forget who they were in 3 seconds. As for those who wanted to make connections, Happy and the group of secretaries who followed him were sent to deal with him. Tony Stark was most impatient when a group of old men came up and said how close they were to Howard and that they would take care of Tony for a while. Then they asked for money and investment. They claimed to be helping each other, but in reality, they were just trying to exchange empty words for real money. The only person Tony kept close was Henry Brown. He had to pay enough attention to him to get others to pay attention to him. But that was also because Tony was curious. Seeing the people around him separated, the eager young master finally asked, "Is that recording real?" "It's real, but the recording is fake." That's why those two idiots were fooled. Tell your people not to be foolish and send it for scientific analysis. It'll be exposed." Tony was stunned and asked, "Aren't you afraid that they'll take the case seriously and send the tape for analysis through formal channels? This case can't be handled properly." "I was betting they wouldn't have the guts. I was lucky, I won the bet, you despicable guy. Sometimes I really doubt you even speak the truth." He picked at the food he had already checked and ate it. Tony spoke one after another, as if venting his frustration. "I do have eavesdropping and recording equipment. You see, they're still running. So if you think you're going to tell a secret, using a jammer is a smart move." Tony's eyes widened, staring at the man in disbelief. Shrugging nonchalantly, Henry removed his left cufflink, placed it on the table, and pushed it over. Tony snatched it up and examined it carefully. "Is this a microphone?" "Bluetooth technology, so the recording equipment is somewhere else." As expected of a scientific expert, he had guessed Henry's thoughts at a glance. Tony casually tossed the cufflink back, and Henry neatly caught it, snapping it back onto his left cuff. Then the young master asked, "What about the recording equipment?" "Let me keep you in suspense, boss. You always see through me, and my little tricks won't last long. Maybe the recording equipment thing was just a bunch of nonsense, just to bluff." With a look of "I don't believe you" on his face, Tony didn't press the issue. Henry said, "Your father would have left behind equipment like jammers, and similar spy equipment for monitoring and surveillance. There must have been quite a few, right? They're all crude gadgets from World War II. I'm seriously considering upgrading them, huh? Better to protect yourself than to worry about something." Henry downed his champagne in one gulp and asked for another. He was now in a position to command others, albeit at the expense of others. He had no such burden as the saying goes, if you don't use your power, it's gone. Have you ever considered that your outburst today might make some people back off? You've already been cut off from all those shady people before they even have any contact with you. Otherwise, they'll foolishly leave evidence on your side, and what will they do? "Oh, do you regret hiring me? Then fire me. After all, the contract we signed allows us to come and go as we please, let you start and leave on the same day. I can't afford to lose face," Tony exclaimed. "Did you know those FBI agents were coming?" Henry smiled and said, "I didn't know. Fortunately, I didn't believe some young masters boast that if I bore the Stark mark, it would be like holy water exorcising a demon, keeping those FBI monsters away, so I made preparations in advance. Now it seems that preparation will come in handy. I'm so lucky. Isn't it?" Henry had almost been stopped by the cops many times recently, and he had always dodged before they noticed. But in a fixed situation like today, hiding was impossible. He could only make some preparations and wait. Damn it. Tony, who was secretly ridiculed again, drank the champagne in dissatisfaction. He snapped his fingers, and the sound made Henry jump with fear, but Tony just wanted to call his followers. "Happy, give me something strong." Happy Hogan, who received the instruction, immediately asked someone to bring a glass of whiskey on a tray. At the same time, Charlize Theron came over. The girl was previously held back by Catherine, and Henry also gave her a hint of "don't come over," so she was forced to watch the whole farce anxiously. Fortunately, no one was fine in the end. Now it was her turn to come over angrily to ask for an explanation. But before Charlize Theron could say anything, Henry put his arm around her waist and lowered his head to cover her mouth. After all, it was not a good occasion for a deep kiss, so the two separated as soon as they touched. But such intimate contact has made Charlize's eyes seem to be tied to Henry's face. "I know you are worried about me, and that makes me very happy. But you can't help with that kind of thing. At times like this, you should be calm and observe instead of running out impulsively." "Yeah." Charlize Theron snuggled into Henry's arms like a little bird. In fact, she herself didn't know whether she was worried about this man or worried about her own future, which had just started to improve and would be interrupted by that unexpected episode. Such thoughts made her feel very ashamed, and she dared not look directly into the man's eyes. The playboy, who was fed a mouthful of dog food, looked at the ostentatious expression and rarely showed a tit-for-tat attitude. He just ordered, "Happy, let someone in." Tony Stark's words were like a switch being turned on. Countless beautiful girls with charming figures suddenly walked into the banquet hall rented from the hotel. They wore hot dresses, showing off their toned thighs, treating this January in Los Angeles as midsummer, showing off their beautiful parts to the fullest, tempting men's fantasies on the edge of pornography. At the same time, The DJ's sound equipment and the disco ball that rotated and emitted colorful lights came in. The passionate music thumped and inspired people's chests. Henry was dumbfounded, looking at Tony Stark, who was hugging him left and right. The young master said, "This is what you told me. The money you earn should be spent to promote economic circulation. And with resources like Stark Films, it would be a waste if you don't make good use of them. Don't worry, I will approve the CEO's public relations expenses in addition to your annual salary, and it will not be a problem to hold banquets every day. Girls, shake your butts. This is my place. What's the big deal about an occasion like an old man's wake? The wildest girl will be rewarded. Henry, come on. This is a welcome party for you." Before the young master could finish his words, he was escorted away by a group of beautiful women onto the dance floor. Henry, on the other hand, felt a deadly gaze radiating from his chin, making his scalp tingle. It seemed that this time next year would be the anniversary of Iron Man's death. Chapter 321 Airborne Challenge. A newly appointed executive inevitably faces challenges from those below them. If they're veterans with proven expertise in the industry, they're relatively easy to challenge. At most, they might encounter some uncooperative veterans, and both sides will need to work out a compromise. But if they're considered a complete outsider, there's no need to question their qualifications, simply dump a mountain of work on their desk and wait for the outcome. If they show any weakness, other executives can openly divide their power and sideline the new CEO. Therefore, wealthy young men who come to the company to gild their reputations or attract women often bring along at least one or two industry veterans to help handle internal company affairs. Or they might simply delegate power. For these individuals, a prestigious title is more important than actual power within the company. They're simply there to gild their reputations, not to be slaves. However, the new CEO didn't bring anyone with him, leaving everyone unsure and left with no choice but to test the waters. The lead was a female colleague from the administrative department. The unlucky person who had lost the rock-paper-scissors game before Henry entered was in charge of giving the new CEO a tour of the company. She was a plump black woman, new to the company, with no outstanding achievements and a steady hand. For a stagnant, old company like Stark Pictures, her performance was just right. Radicalism and risk-taking were precisely the qualities the company needed most. The company's architecture mirrored its atmosphere. Built just after World War II, despite employing the latest construction technology and the finest designers of the time, it couldn't hide its half-century age. There weren't any dramatic sights like exposed rebar or broken pipes, but the occasional cracks in the corners betrayed its history. Walking through every department, the employees, as if on cue, were all absorbed in their own tasks. No one stood up to greet the new CEO. Even without the pointless welcome ceremony, the lack of even a single person explaining the department's responsibilities was a bit excessive. It was the black girl who managed to force herself to squeeze out some information from her brain and explain on behalf of the entire department, who were pretending to be dead. This prevented the situation from becoming too awkward. When Henry walked into the CEO's office, which had been cleaned in advance and not a speck of dust had fallen, he didn't see any European or minimalist design. Instead, he saw a mountain of documents piled up on the desk, which caught his eye. The kind of momentum that wanted to bury the person sitting behind the desk. Henry just wanted to say that it was difficult for the employees who moved the documents over. It would take several rounds to pull this with a cart. The black girl lowered her head awkwardly, placed her hands in front of her lower abdomen, and rubbed them restlessly. Mr. Brown, this is a document that the head of the department asked for approval. Because there was no CEO before, they did all these things themselves. But now you are the CEO. According to regulations, these documents must be approved by you before they can be executed or rejected. And these are things that cannot be delayed. If the approval is delayed by a day, the company's operations may have problems tomorrow. Oh. Henry made a playful sound, listening to the language that could almost be regarded as a threat. Of course, he knew that these were not the words the girl in front of him wanted to say. She was just forced to say it for others, otherwise she would not look like she wanted to find a place to hide. Julian, right, your name. Yes, Mr. Brown, Julian, I remember the place I just visited. There is no company archive or database. It is where past meeting documents and company information are stored. Which department is managed by it? Can you take me there? The archive is managed by the administrative department. It is usually locked, and the key is in our office. I can take you there. Do you want to go now? Well, let's go. I have to look through the old information to see how everyone used to operate. Okay, please follow me. The fat black girl was leading the way. In fact, according to his attitude before dating Charlize, Henry would have been chatting about all kinds of flirtations and showing his humorous and gentlemanly attitude. But now he has a girlfriend, and his position is above everyone else. Flirtatious words can easily be misunderstood as power oppression or sexual harassment. In order to avoid trouble, it is necessary to restrain his mouth. Besides, black girls are really not his cup of tea. The administrative department of an American company is actually similar to the general affairs department of some companies or the secretarial function of a public department, that is, a unit that specializes in handling miscellaneous tasks, including cleaning, maintenance and replacement of basic equipment, purchase of office supplies, etc. Such a department has little power, but is not low in importance. Especially when someone learns to use consumables, such as paper, staples, pens and other office supplies to block people, they can effectively improve their power hierarchy within the company. This has cultivated the habit of people in charge of certain positions to be arrogant. Even when Henry, the new CEO, walked in, the director of administration still sat in his seat. He put his legs on the desk, leaned back in his chair, whistled comfortably, and pretended not to see anyone. The fat black girl stepped forward cautiously. Director, Mr. Brown wants to go into the archives and get the key from you. The archives store all the information of Stark films over the years, including the master tapes of the movies. It's very important. It's a place that anyone can enter. The director of administration put his feet down, sat up straight, and after scolding the fat black girl, he pretended to have just seen Henry. He stood up and said pretentiously, "Oh, isn't this the new CEO? I thought you would accompany Mr. Stark to party for days and nights, but I didn't expect you to come to the company today. It's a pity that the company's archives are of great importance. People like you who know nothing should not go in and make trouble, so as not to increase our troubles. It would not be good if something was lost," Henry asked with a smile. "So, I am not qualified to go in? Is that what you mean?" "Of course not. How could I think so? You are the CEO appointed by Mr. Stark. It's just that there are a lot of documents to be processed on your desk. Instead of dealing with those, you come to disturb our administrative department, which will affect the operation of the company. That's why I want to look at the old documents and meeting minutes to see how the company operates and makes decisions. I have come this far, and no one told me how to cooperate. Why can't I even learn by myself?" Chapter 322 Office Confrontation. "Oh, Mr. Brown, that's too much trouble. If you don't know anything, just delegate authority to each supervisor. That would make things much easier for you. Even if I gave you the key to the archives, how long would it take you to learn? A year? 2 years?" The administrative director remained steadfast, refusing to budge. From his perspective, Henry's excuse was completely unreasonable. So he refused. If his intention was to get the new CEO back to work, such a refusal would be understandable. However, his refusal today wasn't out of kindness, it was simply a lack of respect. After all, office politics aren't about logic. Just give a passable excuse, give each other some respect, and get the job done. But for some reason, the director simply wanted to test the skills of this parachuted-in CEO. There was no way around it, because Henry's resume in the HR department was truly bizarre. The education section was completely blank, he couldn't even produce an elementary school diploma. His qualifications listed only 3 experiences: crabbing, Hollywood actor, and assistant to a washed-up star. How could a young man in his 20s become the CEO of Stark Films? Anyone who saw that resume would have wondered. Some even wondered if he could read or spell. No one could have imagined that Henry could actually learn so much in such a short time, through extensive reading. The executive director's obvious provocation also irritated him. It seemed that young Stark's reputation wasn't as impressive as old Stark's. The executive director had been at the inauguration banquet last night. Could it be that his friendly conversation with Tony Stark was interpreted by these people as a sign that he'd gotten to the top by selling his ass? So, he had to take matters into his own hands. While Tony had thrown a party to boost his confidence, he hadn't said anyone was forbidden from firing. He couldn't find an excuse to attack, and if someone offered themselves, wouldn't he just chop them off? He wasn't in a position to back down easily now. Henry picked up the phone on his desk and started calling. "Hello, Finance. This is CEO Henry Brown. Please help me settle the salary for John Snipe, The administrative director, for today, tisk, another John. You know how many Johns I know. Oh. Don't pay me any attention, I was just talking to myself. Also, how much is the severance pay for laid-off employees? 6 months? Okay, please settle it all together. Second call. Hello, security. This is CEO Henry Brown. Please send someone to oversee the termination of the employee. Please have John Snipe, the former administrative director, pack up his personal belongings and escort him out of the company. Send someone here immediately. After the 2 calls, Henry looked at the dumbfounded administrative director and said with a smile, "You can find a box and prepare to pack your things. You want to fire me. According to California law, the employer can terminate the employment relationship at any time. I'm the company's CEO, so of course I have the power to manage the company's personnel. And I'm also following your original contract and paying you an extra 6 months severance pay. Is that wrong?" The suddenly fired executive director, seething with rage, leaped to his feet and lashed out, "You mad little brat who didn't even graduate from college. I was probably working hard at this company before you were even born. What right do you have to fire me? Do you know how much of the company's resources I control? Without me, do you think you could find the film copyrights? Do you even know where to find the patents for the equipment? The equipment in the warehouse? The equipment rental situation? Which of these company assets isn't under my control? If I don't want to take it out, believe it or not, even you, the CEO, can't get it." Henry was stunned by this scolding. With a sigh, he put on a face of deep regret and picked up the phone to dial again. "Hello, finance. This is Henry Brown. Executive Director John Snipe's salary and severance pay don't need to be settled." "That's it. Hello, legal. This is CEO Henry Brown. Send me some help. There's a jerk here embezzling company assets. I need a complete audit of the company's accounts. If you're short-handed, contact the group's legal team and have them send someone. I just arrived, and you've already messed something like this up. Are you trying to make me take the blame? If there's a problem with the accounts, sue me where I should, and demand every penny of compensation. Company assets belong to the company, not to any individual, and they're not something that will disappear if someone takes them away." After cursing into the phone, Henry let out a sigh of relief and hung up the phone comfortably. If he had known about these nonsense, he would not have made 2 rounds of calls and had to withdraw the original order. What a waste of breath. He was wondering why someone would reveal such a thing. Unhappy at home, wife is too annoying, so he wants to go to jail to avoid the limelight? At this time, the security personnel of the film studio came into the office uneasily, looking at the young and energetic new CEO and the frightened old administrative director. Henry didn't stop. He stood at the door of the office, facing the entire administrative department, and blew a whistle. All the department staff who had been quiet for a long time looked up at him. Julian, who is the deputy of the administrative department, the black girl, who was also frightened, raised her hand stupidly and pointed at a fat black woman who was even bigger than her. "It's Wendy." Henry looked at the fat woman who was called and asked seriously, "What is your full name, Mom?" "Wendy Ingrid." Softening his voice, Henry said, "Very good, Mrs. Ingrid. From now on, you are the head of the administrative department. I think you all heard the conversation in the office just now. A sudden promotion seems to be a good thing. But considering what happened just now and what is about to happen, it seems a little bad." This made the fat black woman make a helpless expression, but still nodded. Henry continued, "Now you have 2 tasks to do immediately. The first is to wait for the company's legal staff to come and accompany them to count the company assets that the former administrative director should hand over, and nothing can be lost. And cooperate with the legal staff to conduct a comprehensive account and property inventory of the administrative department. My bottom line is that the accounts must match, and the bastard in it must spit out everything he has embezzled. How long will it take you to give me a result?" "Well, 3 days, the fat black woman said tentatively. "I'll give you 2 days. If you can't do it, I'm sure someone else in this office will be able to. Then the supervisor position will be replaced. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir." "Second, I need the key to the archives. Please find it now and give it to me." "Yes, sir." The fat black woman agreed, but she still stood there stupidly. Henry saw this and clapped his hands loudly. Move. Move. This is a workplace, not a movie theater. No one should stand and watch a bunch of idiots perform on the big screen. The claim that layoffs affected aorta simply means the successor wasn't paid enough. With enough money, even arteries could be bypassed. Only a stingy boss would send someone to the morgue over a blocked artery. And yet, Tony Stark's target was to avoid bankruptcy. Was Henry really afraid of a mere old servant getting mad? Chapter 323 Challenges Solved. The archives, which Henry had only been able to enter after firing someone, were unremarkable. There were no magnificent collections, nor were there any antique hardcover books that would be found in a wealthy household. Instead, the place was plagued by poor management. The air was filled with musty smells and dust, and numerous fluorescent tubes flickered. Fortunately, there was no smell of rats or small animal droppings. After putting away his keys, Henry turned to the plump black woman. "Julian, you don't have to stay here. Go and notify all department heads for a meeting in the conference room in 2 hours, at 10:25. "Yes, Mr. Brown, go ahead." Once the archives were clear, Henry unleashed his super speed to scan through nearly 20 years of records. While the archives were filthy, the sorting system was still functioning properly. Documents weren't randomly scattered, and were stored according to year and type. The entire process took less than 10 minutes. Henry's rapid movements even stirred up all the dust in the archives. Fortunately, he could hold his breath, or he would have choked to death on the stale dust. It's better to delegate the cleaning and tidying to someone else. Henry had no desire to overstep his bounds, even if he could do it quickly. So, after reviewing what he needed to know, he returned to the CEO's office. The mountain of documents wasn't difficult to handle. Stark Films had been without a CEO in charge for a long time, with each department head operating independently. Driven by autonomy and initiative, they didn't need much input from their superiors. Most documents were simply given in as proposed response, leaving the subordinates to follow suit. Only a small number required comment, and even these contained many pitfalls. However, these pitfalls seemed hastily dug, and the problems were obvious at first glance. So, they were simply rejected, Henry not even bothering to revise them. The film production department, on the other hand, brought in a mountain of project plans and scripts. After Howard shifted focus, Stark Films only downsized its production department, not eliminated it. Therefore, every few years, the studio still released 1 or 2 small-budget independent films. This strategy not only kept the production department afloat, but also helped maintain the distribution department. It can also support emerging directors or independent films with innovative ideas, while also maintaining Stark Films' reputation. The production department doesn't actually have a set standard for which projects or directors to support. They're limited only by the total production budget, a fixed annual figure of $1 million. This figure wasn't insignificant in the early 1950s, but after more than 4 decades of stagnant growth, it's hard to even get a single film off the ground. If the funds aren't used, they'll roll over to the next year. If the film makes a profit, it's the company's fault. If it loses money, while the employees won't lose money, the reputation of the film's owner for producing a film that loses money and flop can be imagined. Therefore, Stark Films' production department has always played it safe, never again embarking on a major production exceeding tens of millions. Now with a new CEO, they're vying for a return to glory, presenting every project they've gathered to Henry, awaiting his approval. After all, Tony Stark has promised Henry over 10 times the production budget he previously had. Even big-budget productions worth tens of millions weren't rejected outright, they simply reported to the young master and requested permission. But looking at the pile, Henry felt they weren't genuinely interested in making a film, but rather were looking to cause trouble. Many of them were indeed projects starring prominent female leads. It seemed Charlize Theron's presence was quite noticeable. Henry hadn't deliberately concealed their relationship. Ultimately, he'd taken on this job today to pave the way for the future actress. Her agent would surely know how to leverage such resources. But the projects presented by Stark Films' production department were so unfamiliar to him before his time travel that some didn't even have scripts. They were seeking approval and funding based on a few storyboards. Not to mention the obvious scams. Others, Henry knew, were already in the works at film studios. Some were even in post-production. Recruitment for those crews had already been sent to the Screen Actors Guild. With Henry's memory, the chances of him making a mistake were slim. Simply put, most of the stuff the production department sent over was either filler-sized junk or a potential legal pitfall. He hoped to find some hidden gem, perhaps a hot movie he'd known about before his time travel. After searching through it, Henry concluded he was delusional. There weren't that many good scripts waiting to be snatched up for free. As for Stark Films' most important source of revenue, the various requests and documents from the equipment department were mostly feedback from users of cameras and other equipment. There were requests for improvements, defects discovered during use, and even simple complaints about price. The funny thing was, Stark Films already had its own equipment manufacturing and R&D departments. Most of these issues should have been resolved internally, but they landed on the CEO's desk. Their intentions were clear, they were just looking to cause trouble. Looking at these documents, which mirror the user feedback, Henry made no comments. After all, he hadn't seen the equipment being complained about, so even if he wanted to help with a design, he couldn't. So, he simply sorted the documents, grouping those with similar issues together. After completing these tasks, Henry looked out at the empty office. The small office outside, where a secretary or administrative assistant should have been, was equally deserted. Henry, now a senior employee, had no choice but to painstakingly carry a stack of documents. He piled them almost chin-high, so he could see where he was going, and then made his way alone to the meeting room. Perhaps it was because the route from the CEO's office to the meeting rooms on different floors was too remote, or perhaps it was something else entirely. There wasn't a single person he could call in for help. What was office culture like in the US? Could a boss just ask someone to help out with chores? Or would they be rebuffed with "that's not my job description"? Having never worked in the American workplace, the Kryptonian felt a bit uneasy. Even before crossing over, he had been a laborer, never a supervisor, let alone a CEO. All of this was a completely new experience for Henry. Finally reaching the meeting room, he found a group of administrative staff preparing. Henry immediately spotted the conspicuous, plump, black woman. It seemed he hadn't been in the administration department long, which was why she was the one who caused all the trouble. But this was, after all, the department where Henry had established his authority. Unlike other places, they played dumb and played blind. As soon as Henry entered the meeting room, carrying a stack of documents, everyone stopped and greeted him in unison. Mr. Brown, a nimble young man, hurried forward to take the documents. Finally handing over the documents, Henry clapped his hands and breathed a sigh of relief. Chapter 324 The first meeting of the film industry CEOs. But the pile of documents in his hand was not all. Henry said to the young man, "Thank you. There are still many documents in my office, please move them all over. We will use them in the meeting later, and you can use a trailer to move them. Different piles of information have different uses, remember to separate them and don't mix them together." "Okay, Mr. Brown." The young man immediately called his colleagues, including Julian, to work on the move. Henry, meanwhile, rubbed his fair chin, debating whether to emulate Tony Stark and grow a beard. Not taking into account how long the spaceship with a baby in it had been adrift before his time travel, he'd arrived on Earth about 70 years earlier. It was now 95, meaning this body had spent roughly 25 years on Earth. Let's just say he was 25. He called others young, but he wasn't actually that old. According to a typical educational trajectory, 25-year-olds would have barely graduated from college and only been working for 2 or 3 years. If he'd gone on to graduate school, he'd probably still be worrying about his thesis. There's a saying back home, a man without hair on his lips is not reliable. Tony Stark had grown a meticulously groomed beard, most likely to deal with the veterans of Stark Industries. So what about him? Should he also grow a beard to add some authority? Standing by the French window, Henry gazed out, his thoughts swirling. He also monitored the situation at Stark Films. It seemed the firing of the executive director was having an impact, with word spreading throughout the various departments. Henry wondered if firing just one executive director would truly impact the company's core business. He wasn't a sales champion or a top executive in the technical department, and certainly not a Stark relative. Tony Stark was now a lone man. No matter how many people with the same last name Stark sought to claim kinship, they couldn't stop him from digging up their entire ancestral lineage and spreading rumors. If the fired executive director truly held some vulnerability, then, so be it. This wasn't his company. How could an employee feel the burden? Even if he did mess up, as long as it didn't land him in jail, at most he'd just have to go through a period of pain and adjustment. If he could get through it, things would open up. If he couldn't, he could just let go of what couldn't be salvaged and find another path. As the old saying goes, The Earth will keep spinning even without anyone. Not everyone is like Superman, able to reverse the Earth's rotation and thus reverse time. While his thoughts were wandering, the executives from Stark Films arrived in full force before the appointed meeting time. Even Wendy Ingrid, the new executive director, who had barely taken up the job and had probably barely even sat down in her chair, had arrived. Henry sensed that the poor former executive director, John Snipe, was being escorted by legal and security personnel as he went through the items he was supposed to hand over. The list was a bit long. Every item missing was an additional item added to the charge of embezzlement. Embezzlement in the United States is considered theft, and sentencing is based on the amount stolen. The most serious felony, first-degree theft, carries a maximum sentence of 25 years in prison. Faced with such an accusation, would John dare to act rashly? He'd probably spend his retirement in prison. After everyone was seated, Henry turned from the window and took the chair. He didn't sit down, but stood to address everyone. Hello everyone, I'm Henry Brown, the new CEO of Stark Films. Some of you may have seen me at yesterday's inauguration party, and some may not. It doesn't matter. From today on, please remember my face. We'll be seeing each other for a while. Henry waved, and several administrative staff members, who had been specially stationed at the conference room entrance, came forward. Following Henry's instructions, they carried the documents and presented them to the heads of their respective departments. Here are the documents you brought to my office this morning for review. I've processed them all and sorted them for you. Without shuffling through the contents, Henry pointed to each pile and outlined the key projects within. He spoke rapidly, like a rapper, yet his words were clear enough to be understood. For most documents deemed as drafted, Henry would single out the important ones for praise, then say, I'm looking forward to the results. Please report back to me. As for the unreliable trap documents, Henry didn't expose their ulterior motives, but instead refuted them with reasoned arguments. Even the erroneous text was pointed out by Henry. When it came to the production department, Henry offered even the most basic encouragement. Pointing to the taller pile of documents, he said, these projects and plans are unacceptable. Return those that need them, and destroy those that don't. Even though our production department hasn't made a film in ages, we shouldn't be recklessly pursuing unreliable projects. We're a for-profit business, not a charity. We specialize in helping people realize their daydreams. Pointing to the shorter pile of documents, Henry continued, as for these, I know other film companies have already begun production, some even entering post-production. Why is it here? Are there any legal concerns? Please ask our production colleagues to cooperate with our legal colleagues in an investigation. If there are any violations, we will not cover up for them and will prosecute them accordingly. Henry refused to mention whether someone had come up with this project to frame the decision-makers and cause disputes with other film companies. But everyone was in the industry, so how could they not see the consequences? A lawsuit would be a minor issue, but the money already invested would inevitably be listed as a loss. It was unclear who would be held responsible. Finally, when it came to the equipment department, Henry was even more blunt. He glared at the guys who looked more like people than engineers and said, I don't understand why a request to research a solution for a problem like a loose screw would land on my desk. Or maybe the customer wants a feature, but you haven't even offered a suggestion. Are you expecting me to figure it out? If the equipment R&D and manufacturing department can't solve this problem, then fire the entire department and replace them with a group of engineers who can. If management and product managers don't know how to assign tasks to the right people, then fire these unsuitable individuals who are being paid exorbitant salaries and replace them with qualified individuals who can both get the job done and lead. Stark Pictures' most important source of revenue today is the equipment department. I don't need someone who doesn't understand the situation dragging the company down and causing losses. Do you understand? The equipment manager was deeply dissatisfied with Henry's accusations. She said, Mr. Brown, you probably didn't read the documents we submitted carefully. It's been a long time since our company's camera equipment has seen any breakthrough innovation. Whether it's German brands like Arri, Panavision, or Phantom, they're all using the latest technology in the same field and making impressive progress. If Stark Pictures can't come up with better equipment, we'll eventually be eliminated from the film industry. This company, founded by Mr. Howard Stark and with such a great history, won't survive into the next century. Quotation mark. Chapter 325 Everyone wants Tony Stark. What a huge hat! The head of the equipment department had only just told Tony Stark to come to the company and use his brilliant yet unreliable mind to upgrade the company's products. This is Tony Stark's biggest problem these days. To boost the post-transformation Stark Industries and maintain the confidence and loyalty of investors and consumers, he has indeed achieved success in commercializing products in many areas. While not leading the way for generations, Stark's products are superior to other companies in the same field, just like Stark Industries' past reputation. In this respect, young Stark rivals his father, Howard Stark. Both father and son are undeniably talented, and they understand how to balance fame and profit in the business world. The difference is that Howard Stark is interested in and has pursued nearly everything, while Tony Stark focuses solely on core military projects, never considering a home blender or an automatic pencil sharpener for students. Stark Industries' current business isn't entirely focused on weapons. Some scrap equipment can be used in civilian applications. It's just that weapons are the most important and profitable. But Tony Stark is undeniably a Midas touch. Not only are his products superior in performance and quality to those of similar companies, but their unique design style also garners inexplicable praise. The gold and red color combination, in particular, that inherently flashy red and gold, didn't just become popular during the Iron Man era. It's been around since then. Military weaponry requires a certain degree of camouflage, otherwise, Stark Industries wouldn't have released something like the red and gold Apocalypse tank or a flashy red and gold sniper rifle. He's afraid the enemy won't see him. Everyone teases him for his youth, and it's then that Henry realizes that his Earth age is the same as Tony Stark's. Both are 1970. Fortunately, their registered birthdays are different, otherwise, it would be so embarrassing if anyone brought it up. Everyone wanted to take advantage of that brilliant mind and get him to work for free. Of course, Henry wouldn't support such a thing, at least not within the film industry he was entrusted with. He wouldn't proactively ask Tony Stark for help. Most importantly, he couldn't bring himself to ask. They were veterans from Howard Stark's era, so they couldn't bully Tony, their nephew, by taking advantage of their seniority. If he'd suggested something like that, he'd have been blasted to dust by the ever-venomous Tony Stark. However, it's not impossible to exploit Stark Industries, but it would require skill. For example, if Stark Industries already had a product, there was no need to develop it themselves in the same field, creating a situation where they'd be fighting each other. So, it was only natural for Stark Industries to provide technical support. And besides his own hidden motives for joining Stark Films, he certainly had to make some public achievements. Otherwise, he'd be nothing more than a white-collar worker, working for nothing. If he really thought that way, he'd be better off being a consultant, just asking no questions and collecting the consulting fee. There was no need to be CEO. So, after deciding to take over Stark Films, Henry knew exactly what he wanted to do. It wasn't about churning out a few low-budget blockbusters or throwing all his resources at Charlize Theron to create a film queen. His true potential lay in his super brain and the future trends he knew before his time travel, advances in film technology and equipment. The key was the development of digital technology. Film technology had reached its peak. Beyond 35mm film, there was the even more advanced 65mm film technology, commonly known as IMAX. This technology, developed since the 1970s by the Canadian company IMAX, encompasses film production, conversion, and projection systems. To achieve optimal results, even theaters had specific specifications. This was why this full-color gamut system, boasting higher resolution, brightness, and greater contrast, failed to replace the older 35mm film system. The biggest reason is that the cost of elimination is prohibitive, making it difficult for the market to widely accept it. If Henry wants to develop in this area, he'll just have to follow behind. Watching others eat meat while he drinks soup is certainly not what Henry wants. Furthermore, IMAX has proven that the 35mm film system and market are not easily replaced. Digital camera storage media has actually been around for a long time. Led by Japanese companies, Sony and others have already established significant market share in this field. However, they use magnetic tape. As a result, many television companies are no longer using traditional film for program production, opting for the more convenient magnetic tape. And the entire system, from pre-production to post-production, has its own dedicated equipment. This is also a well-developed field. Henry's goal is to leverage the digital process of computer systems and simultaneously raise the image encoding and decoding level to a level approaching that of 35mm film. This means nearing 4K UHD quality. Their own equipment is already capable of 1080p HD. With Stark Films, it shouldn't be difficult for them to reach even higher levels. Actually, it was only the beginning of 1995, and the mainstream CPU in commercial personal computers was an Intel Pentium CPU with a frequency of 75 to 100 MHz. In an era when CPUs weren't categorized as basic, standard, or server grade, high-end commercial computers could be equipped with 2 CPUs for increased performance. But honestly, this level of computer performance was still insufficient to support digital filmmaking techniques, especially for post-production tasks like editing and color grading, not to mention computer special effects rendering. However, once computer performance reached a certain level, the development barrier would be lowered, allowing anyone with a passion to join. Once the so-called technology matured, the market would likely be saturated. What role would there be for a Kryptonian like me then? It was to anticipate the future, accumulate technology, and then set standards before others. Only then would Henry find his involvement in all this interesting. They say that third-rate companies sell products, second-rate companies design, and first-rate companies set standards. It's not about creating groundbreaking things or specifications to claim first-rate status. The most important thing was to ensure that everyone adhered to the standards he set, without legal disputes, and that anyone who wanted to use the product had to pay the price. Only a top-tier company could achieve this. Henry wanted to see if Stark Films, backed by Stark Industries, could do the same. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.